Hello and welcome to the Bond Revisited podcast with me, Tom.
And me, Joe.
The podcast where we rewatch the Bond films one by one, discuss them, and then rank them alongside all the other Bond films to build our own definitive list for the Bond franchise. You are listening to episode 1, where we'll be revisiting the film that started it all, Dr. No. Now, I have to recap the previous episode a little bit before we start, because in episode 0, the shocking revelation came out about you, Joe, that you actually think Dr. No is one of the worst James Bond films.
Okay, all right, you just went straight for the jugular.
I had to. The people needed to know.
Okay, I feel like I need to enter like the clip from Arrested Development with Job saying I made a huge mistake.
Okay, that's good to know.
Because I think I made a huge mistake, but we'll get on to that. Because yes, my expectations going into this film, it was number 3 on my bottom 5 Bond films.
So out of 25 films that you looked at that list and you said Dr. No, yeah, 23. That seems like that's where that should be.
Yes, I did. And so that kind of gives you the idea of where I thought, just how bad I thought this film was going to be. And I kind of thought it was going to be very primitive, very small scale, kind of rough around the edges and forgettable. And we'll get into it. I think it is still some of those things, but I think it was very harsh to put it at that ranking. So yeah, I'm sorry, just ahead of everything else. All right.
Well, we'll see what Twitter says, if Twitter still exists by the time this goes out. But they'll judge you. You said in the last episode, or the first one, I hope nobody hates me. I think people are going to hate me for this.
That didn't take long, did it?
It didn't take long, no.
Yeah.
But okay, that's quite interesting. So, yeah, because you were saying that I think the reasons why you ranked it so low is because it probably just didn't have a ton of those elements that felt like Bond, and that it was just missing that kind of Bond feel, and it was just too early for it to really get going.
That's exactly it, yeah.
So, I didn't really talk too much about Dr. No in the last episode, but my general expectations is that I was quite high on this film, actually. It was one that I didn't put in my initial top 5, but I had it quite high up in my head. We didn't do the full list, but for me, I know that I like From Russia With Love more. I know I like Goldfinger more, but outside of the other Sean Connery films, I would probably say this was like my 3rd favorite before rewatching it today. Because I have a soft spot for a franchise and its like early versions where it hasn't quite figured everything out, but you see all the patterns, you see all the little things that are going to become more elevated and focused on it. You can see them finding its feet. It's like the spark, it's there. It's like when you listen to an old band or like a band that's become very successful, that you really like their new stuff, and then you go back and listen to like their old demos or EPs, and you're like, well, the sound's not there, the vocalist can't sing quite right, the guitar noise is a little bit off, the mixing's not quite there, but you see the spark. So broadly speaking, I like that sort of thing. So for me, I had quite a positive view of Dr. No going into this rewatch.
Yeah, I can see what you mean by that. But you can see the potential, and it's almost kind of novel seeing where it all started from in a way.
Yes, there's just no other Bond film like this, but I remembered it being a solid film in its own right. So for me, that's what kind of made it a unique and special Bond film. And as I spoke about in the last episode, I'm all about those kind of unique standalone Bond films. There's something I really kind of appreciate about that. And to me, Dr. No, again, before this rewatch, had that quality. So I was actually really quite looking forward to seeing it again.
Well, there you go. 2 very different expectations going in. But I have a feeling we might end up with similar end results.
Well, we're going to rank them the same today. I can promise you that.
No. Actually, I was going to go... No. All right, we'll see. I guess
I was going to rank it first. You were going to rank it last.
Yes, I like that.
Okay, so before we get into the film itself, this is the first time we're rewatching these, so I got to go through that nice process, and I'm sure you did too, of going to the shelf, getting the box set out, getting a little bit of dust off there. Not too much, but a little bit of dust. And going through the old Bond box set, which is a really cool box set. Like, they do really put in the work. And it's always nice to go through those and see all the discs, all these crazy discs, and how much kind of effort they put in to make it feel like a Bond focused box set.
You are completely wrong.
Oh no!
So for me anyway, I didn't go to the Blu-rays. I just watched them on Amazon Video since they're all on there now. And I was quite surprised because they're in 4K as well. So just made it easier.
That is a good point, actually, because I was using the Blu-rays, but not the 4K Blu-rays. So mine would have only been in 1080p.
Oh, see, I saw all of Sean Connery's sweaty face in crisp detail on my TV. Lovely.
Pause. Zoom. Pause.
Enhance.
Go in on that. But that's a good point, actually. I didn't think about that at all, because when No Time to Die came out, they put it on Amazon Prime so you could watch it. But it's only since that we hit the Bond 60th anniversary that they also said, yes, we're going to put all of them up on there. But to be honest, I don't really trust them to keep those films up. I think they're going to go down again at some point. So if that's the case, I guess keep that box set ready.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. They've already taken them down once. So, and I don't know why exactly. Probably some sort of rights, legal stuff, mumbo jumbo. But you're right. It's always nice to have physical media. I'll definitely be having that box set within reach for the future.
Yeah, definitely. It was kind of interesting because my box set, we won't talk too much about the box set, I promise. My box set, it's like split into 3 different cases. And one of them is huge, which has like all the older films on, like Sean Connery or Roger Moore. And then they get like thinner and thinner. And I don't quite know why they did it like that. It doesn't make sense to me.
Oh, I think we do have the same one then, actually.
It might be. Maybe they use the same format. I guess it would be silly if they completely change the cases each time. Maybe they just use the same one and just print a new box and kick it out there.
Yeah.
But when I opened it up, I saw From Russia with Love, and I was like, well, that's not quite right. Where's the Dr. No disc? But it's like behind the leaflet. Like there's this little leaflet of Bond, and you have to like get rid of that, and then there's the Dr. No disc behind it. So that's not a good first sign.
Even they don't want you to watch this film.
They knew they'll just put Dr. No behind the paper. I mean, it should have been Diamonds Are Forever. I could do that. I could swap the discs.
This podcast is over.
I can swap the disc and hide the Bond film I dislike behind that paper. That's why they did it. It must be.
I mean, it probably has Sean Connery's old toupeed head on it, doesn't it? So, I mean, if you want to hide that, I don't blame you.
Sean Connery's old toupeed head.
Yeah.
No, you're right. You're not wrong.
Oh, yeah.
So just one other thing. It does mean out you missed out on the whole presentation thing, which is all very nice with the Blu-ray. But with the list of options you have, they've all been like Bond. There's like Bond versions of those. Mm-hmm. So you don't hit play film. You hit initiate mission.
I love that. That reminds me of old school DVDs when you had games on DVDs, and it was just, yeah, you're right. They do put a lot of effort into that stuff.
But the one that kind of got me is that you've also got like mission selection for if you want to select a specific scene. But for the language, they say language decryption. It's like,
oh, very good.
So they're really selling this as this film you're watching is like some secret spy classified document that you're decrypting in a certain language.
If they really wanted to go for some realism, they should have made it self-destruct as well.
Well, there's quite a few of these to do. I don't want to have to buy another box set each time. Or I put it in my PlayStation 5 as well, so that would be very expensive if they did that.
Okay, yeah, maybe not that then.
Maybe for Diamonds Are Forever. But anyway.
We need to stop with this. We're bullying now. We're bullying that film.
Yeah, we're going to have a full hour or two of bullying later. So I should keep it build up, keep that anger inside so I can unleash it for that episode. That's what you're saying, right?
Sure. Something along those lines, yeah.
Okay. Excellent. So let's get into the film itself. I think the thing that really stands out about the intro of this film is how it's like what I was saying before, that all the ideas are kind of there, but none of it is comes together in a way that you would expect it. So you get the circles going across, iconic. You get Bond walking across, iconic. But the Bond film doesn't, or the Bond theme doesn't play during it.
It's a weird sort of xylophone sounding thing. I don't know what instrument it is, but yeah, it's it doesn't quite have the gravitas that they later had.
Yeah, they just didn't quite, it's like they didn't quite know what they had with the Bond theme. And it's quite ironic that they don't play it during that very first bit. Well, they do play it during the opening bit, but it's ironic they don't play it there because throughout the film, they are absolutely obsessed with playing this Bond theme. They play it so much.
Yeah.
It gets a little bit much.
That was actually, Tom and I both made notes whilst watching this for this podcast, obviously. And that was one of my notes, is that they just didn't really have that much other music to use, so they just kept on using the Bond theme, and sometimes using it in what I would say is not very sensible locations. It just didn't really. It kind of made the film a bit juxtaposed with what was going on screen when you had this dramatic music playing.
Yeah, so when I first heard it as part of the film, I think in the casino scene, that was really cool. And actually, I made a note saying it's really awesome actually just hearing the Bond theme as part of the score itself and having it play and having it tied to that imagery. That's really quite neat because a lot of the later Bond films kind of didn't do that and more saved it for maybe a little sting during the film, or they just play it during the credits, which is a great use of it for sure. But actually hearing it as part of the film, I thought was really cool. But then, as you say, they keep doing it. And the one that stood out to me, which is very early on in the film, is where Bond's just at the airport getting a car.
Exactly
and then he makes a phone call and it's like, ba-da, ba-da. It's like, what? Why are they playing it here?
Yeah, Bond music at weird times, e.g. airport. That's exactly what I wrote down, because it was just one of those things where I think and the weird thing is later on in the film, I know we shouldn't jump around too much, but there are scenes where it is just silent. And actually, it works. It's fine just to have the background noise of a room or traffic sometimes. You don't need this bombastic theme playing when Bond is literally in a little phone booth about to make a call. It's just strange.
Yeah, 100%. Like you say, there's tons of things where it's silent and it does make the music stand out in a very positive way. But when that music is the Bond theme, which is quite big and in your face, and a song that you've heard multiple times before, it's kind of like, okay, sure. Right. Gotcha. Okay. It's more of this.
Yeah. And that opening sequence, I just thought very, very disjointed. It was almost like three separate things in one, because I kind of forgot how quickly it shifts from the whole dots and the Bond music to then we have this sort of silhouette. It might be like an Apple advert from the 2000s of the people dancing, and then eventually the three blind men sort of thing going on. And
it's like they wrote the theme, so they're like, well, we've got to play the theme at the start, but they wanted a 60s. It's not even like a 60s groovy vibe, is it? Like, I guess it is colorful people dancing, but it's more just kind of vague music that plays. I can't even remember what that second track is anymore. No, it's so neither. Just kind of nothingy, but it just is so different from the Bond theme. But then it's like they wanted that, but then someone also said, right, well, I want to start the film with Three Blind Mice. And that person, I guess, was the director. I don't know, because they did it. So then it goes from Bond theme, classic, this weird kind of vague music with people dancing. And then I should say, Three Blind Mice as a focal track just starts playing. And there's three silhouettes of three old men walking across on screen.
Yeah, kind of a strange intro. It almost feels like maybe it was just because they had too many credits and the Bond song wasn't long enough. I really don't know. But if they had just stopped after the kind of iconic Morris Binder dots, I think it would have been great. But it was such a strange footing to start on this film where you're like, oh, this is a bit all over the place.
Yeah, it's good that they went for let's have the Bond theme playing at the start rather than Three Blind Mice. Like that is a direction they could have gone from Russia with Love. They kick in Three Blind Mice.
I want to hear Shirley Bassey's version of it.
Yeah.
It'll be so loud and so out there.
I think she could do it though.
Even today.
If you needed to get anyone, get Shirley Bassey on Three Blind Mice.
Yeah, she's on speed dial.
Not after 7 p.m. though. She doesn't do late nights.
That's true. Yeah.
But again, it's one of those where I think it already, like in the first 5 minutes, I was like, I'm glad we're doing this rewatch, because in, I think, everyone's head, you know that this music comes from Dr. No, and you know that some of those elements or classic elements were already in there. You just only really think of those classic elements with the intro. you just kind of assume it's just Sean Connery coming out, chewing the gun, they play that, a bit of credits and move on. You actually completely forget that they have three blind mice and all this other stuff because you just kind of, it's just so different that you just don't even remember it.
Yeah, and that's exactly why it was up there at number 3. I'm not going to say that anymore. I just really had no memory of a lot of this stuff.
So after that, it goes into the film itself. And I think, well, you were watching the 4K version, and I'm not an expert when it comes to video and restoration and stuff, but it looks really good. It's always nice to watch these films and these 61s that have been restored. And again, I'm not an expert at this stuff. Someone might come along and say, here's my top 10 reasons why they failed. And look at the grain. You're not looking at the grain. But it looked really good, like full screen, nice and clean, nice and sharp. Like straight away, it was like a positive impression, just kind of like looking at this film. And it kind of keeps up like that. Like this is a nice looking film throughout.
It was, yeah, I would agree. I was really impressed by just, how clean it all looked. But also, I think it was sort of a bit of a double-edged sword because seeing it in this high quality, you see some crimes that would have been hidden back in the 60s when this was shown, which we'll get onto later on. I mean, there's a few things I noticed, but it's sort of like it's beautiful with some things, but then it's almost like you're seeing too much at the same time with some shots.
That's fair. I can't really think of anything that stood out to me. There were some edits that I noticed that were a little bit off. And actually, at the very beginning of the film, there is one. So we have two scenes, one of a man being shot by somebody, and then another scene of a woman being shot by somebody. But when the woman gets shot, you can see the edit between them standing there, the guy with the gun pointing it at the woman, and then her falling to the ground. And you can see that they edited it between those two shots.
Yeah, there's a bit of a jump cut there, isn't there?
Yeah, like she doesn't have a blood pack or whatever they would do nowadays. Like he just stood there with the gun and then they just cut to her, I guess, after putting on a blood pack, falling to the ground and then probably just added in the gunshot afterwards.
Yep. Yeah, that was one of them. And I think at another point in the film, there's also like a boom mic in the corner of the shot, and it's just
really? I didn't see that.
Yeah, I think so. Anyway, I need to go back and double check it, but there was definitely something that I feel should not have been in the frame. So,
I wish I not noticed that. I'm gonna have to go back and find that. Oh.
It's one of those things where it's really not a massive deal at all. It doesn't, it hasn't ruined the film in any way, even the kind of dodgy looking jump cuts. But it's just these things that you notice and you think, oh yeah, this is the first one. This isn't in the same vein as even 2 films later, sort of thing.
Yeah, you're totally right. But I kind of agree that it's not a big deal. Like you notice them, but you kind of judge it on its own kind of merits and on its own kind of the context of the film, and with it being the first. I was thinking about this actually. It's like, because none of this stuff really bothered me. But of course, if a Marvel film came out and had these sort of errors, you'd be like, what is this? Like, what went so wrong here? But it's just not fair to compare a film in the 2020s with a massive budget and say, well, that wouldn't have these editing errors, to something that was made in the early 60s on a very small budget. And also thinking about it, I don't know if there's many films that I kind of watch or would rewatch that came out before Dr. No. This might be one of the oldest films that I ever would go back and rewatch.
Are you saying that you don't go back and watch Wizard of Oz religiously?
Nope.
Well, me neither. So, no, that's a good point, actually. These films, as we do progress through them, it's important to keep in mind when they were made. There's no point in comparing this to a Daniel Craig film. Of course, it's going to be less polished. It's going to be more rough around the edges.
Joe, don't say there's no point in comparing the films. That's our whole thing, dude. Don't blow us up here. We're going to be comparing them to Daniel Craig films. That's going to happen.
Okay. Scratch that bit. Edit that out.
We'll edit that out. No worries.
But yeah, I think it's just important keeping the provenance of the film in mind.
Yes, it's one of those where, because of the look of the film and the feel of the film, you accept it within those. So for me, none of this stuff is like would actually affect the ranking. I mean, I guess we'll see, but I can't ever see myself saying, well, I'm going to push this one above Dr. No because Dr. No has that couple of weird edits. Like, it's totally fine. It makes sense within the context of the film.
Absolutely. And there's lots of things to like about this film as we get on as well, because obviously after that, eventually, so Strangways was the character who was shot by the seemingly blind men. What do you know? They weren't.
Goodness.
And then we sort of very quickly get on to Bond.
Well, that's the thing that's quite nice about this film. The pacing is actually quite good, and especially early on, you get the setup and everything quite quick. And as you say, you get these two kind of scenes, and then it's straight to Bond's intro. There's so many things to say about this intro. I guess I'm going to let you start.
Well, I think it's very it's not very long. But it just hits everything it needs to make this character reveal feel like something bigger. It has that little. I mean, I don't know about you. I don't really know nothing about the the card game that they're playing.
Oh, I actually wrote that down. I wrote down, what game are they playing? I'm like, I think it's some form of poker, but it's literally like, here's two cards. Oh, I lose, rats. Like, it's got less skill than Snap is what they're playing. And it was like, oh, Mr. Bond, you're so good at drawing cards.
That's what I mean. Yeah, it feels like, wow, Bond is like, he's doing so well here. It's like some sort of version of Baccarat, I believe. But I don't even know what that actually is. So,
no.
They have that, and they have Sylvia Trench, who actually is the one who delivers a sort of James Bond template of a line. And it's so smoky as well. You just see the amount of smoke on the screen. It's just like, oh my God, these characters' lungs. But it kind of adds to that vibe of just, it's not seedy, but it's just very, very 60s, very, very cool. Smoking's cool. No. But yeah, I thought it was great.
I think... Yeah, I put subtle but effective or efficient. Subtle might not be the right word really for it. But I think I meant subtle in the fact that there's, it's a big moment and they build to it in a very smart way. So initially, James Bond is there. And actually the guy who's looking for him says his name. He's like, is James Bond here? Like, it's the first time you hear James Bond, it's just someone just being like, is James Bond about? I don't know. So he's here because obviously they wouldn't have this scene and someone asking for him. And then you go into that smoky, seedy, but 60s cool room. And then it goes through this kind of motion of initially you don't see him, but somebody else has said his name. But then you see his action because he wins the hand. And then it cuts behind him and you kind of see him a little bit, but not too much. And then he wins another hand. And then eventually when it comes to that moment of saying his name is when, well, actually he speaks a little bit beforehand, and then he says his name after the camera flips right in front of him and you see him completely, and he says that iconic line. Like, it builds itself in this very kind of small way where it's coming, and you get these little like breadcrumbs of James Bond being here and who he is. And when it does build to that effect and the music kicks in at the same time, there's not a lot to it, but as you say, it just works really well because of that build up to that moment.
Yeah, they did very well with what they had, which I think you can say about the whole film, really.
Yes, and it actually made me kind of think about another couple of films because, of course, James Bond is like the most famous spy character out there, but there's tons of other kind of characters like this. And I remember, have you seen the Jack Reacher films with Tom Cruise?
No.
So I saw the first one, but I couldn't get through it because I thought it was terrible. But I saw about the first half of it a few years ago, and they did the wrong way of doing this, where there's build up to Jack Reacher and you get that view of him. But first of all, it doesn't work because it's bloody Tom Cruise. Like, he doesn't look any different. It's just Tom Cruise walking in. But what they do is have everyone talk about like, Jack Reacher's here. Have you heard it's Jack Reacher? Oh my goodness, Jack Reacher. He's the coolest guy alive. Jack Reacher. Did you hear what he did in that last assignment? He's crazy, this guy. So they try and do that thing where everyone around him describes how cool and amazing he is. And then they revealing it's Tom Cruise that he's just walked in.
Wow, Tom Cruise.
wow, I can't believe it. 2 curries. That's crazy.
I think, yeah, that is, if that had been in this film, it would have kind of taken all the wind out of the sails, wouldn't it? Because that's the whole point, is it trying to, it's difficult, but if you take your mind back to 1962, the books were popular, sure. People knew who Bond was, but it's a big moment. It's like Harry Potter. I don't know, when you saw Harry Potter on the film, it's the character, this literary character, it's their first big movie role, sort of, seeing it on the big screen. And I kind of, it works really well in that sense of, it doesn't need all this big build up to it, because you know who the character is, you know it's Bond. Like, it doesn't need other people saying, oh my goodness, it's Bond who's just walked in.
Yeah.
That's enough just to see him.
Yeah, exactly. Like, that's what court is, right? I guess I don't know what court is, and we could spend a whole other podcast talking about that. But really, the more subtle approach almost helps with that feeling of, yes, this guy's a big deal, but we don't have to show you he's a big deal. You just kind of get that sense from all these more subtle things that we do. And so nobody really says how cool James Bond is. And actually, later in the film, there's moments where he very much isn't cool, which works quite well. And that's another thing that I think, don't want to get too much into what Bond is or what makes him good, but other characters like this are more just kind of invincible badasses. And James Bond very much is not that, but he still is cool in his own way. And I think this introduction kind of does a very good job of having all of those elements in here.
Yes, definitely.
So after that, we get to the first Moneypenny scene, and it just felt a little creepy. I know that's something I'm just going to have to leave at the door for this rewatch, but without the fact that this is the first time and he just sits on her chair like that and then like kisses her on the forehead, like it just felt a little creepy.
Do you think so?
I guess so. I mean, I guess you could justify it in terms of they're old friends.
Yeah.
And, obviously Moneypenny is like flirting with him in the same way Bond's flirting with that. But the fact that this was the introduction is what made it feel a little bit creepy to me. If this was later in the films where they've been more established as these kind of friends, I'd be like, sure, fine, that makes sense. But the fact that you don't know who this woman is, and then he just straight away like goes in there, which is a little bit of a theme of this film that we'll get to. But this was the first kind of inkling of that. That's a little creepy to me.
Yeah, I can kind of get that. To me, it wasn't creepy. I think it had that sort of, what you were saying, it sets them up as this existing friendship. And I think what would have made it creepy is if, I don't know what Moneypenny's reaction would have been. But I think like Lois Maxwell and Sean Connery, they just had great sort of chemistry together. And that didn't make it creepy because she sort of played off of it. And there are definitely points in other Bond films where there is a new Moneypenny and it doesn't have that same relationship. And I think it does feel a bit creepier. But with this, I sort of thought, actually, it was quite nice. Maybe I'm a creep.
No, fair enough. Like you say, if it was replacing the actress, which they did eventually, they didn't really replace that very well. It's kind of like later on when they replaced Q and you had the new Q, it was a very different type of character, which made it work in a way where only that actress could really make Moneypenny work in the way they do with this franchise. Because, she seems strong, right? It's not like she seems very kind of, she stands her ground in a way that bounces off Bond in a way that makes sense and works.
Yeah. Yeah, if she'd have recoiled, that would definitely have a different vibe to the scene.
And then you go straight into the first Bond and M meeting, and I have to say I love this scene. It's so great, and I don't know the actor's name at the top of my head. I'm hoping you do.
Oh, Bernard Lee.
Bernard Lee. He's just great straight away.
He is, having read some of the Bond books since seeing a lot of these Bond films, haven't read a ton, but I've obviously read M on the page from Ian Fleming, and it really does cement that some of these M actors are just really nail it. I mean, you could argue it's not a particularly complicated character to be. You just have to be this stern, grumpy-looking man, but there is a bit more to it. And I think even in this first scene with Bond, with him and Bond, you sort of get the idea that yeah, Bond works for Her Majesty's government, and yes, he is out there. He might die, and M knows this, but there's this little bit of warmth between them. There's this little bit of kind of like father-son element. I don't know whether I'm just kind of making it up, but I did feel that a little bit.
I didn't quite get father-son, but I definitely got like mutual respect. Like we will, and I guess that's maybe where the family thing comes in, where there's clearly some type of respect there, even though they have different views, but they'll still like mock each other or push against each other and kind of fight like maybe a family kind of would.
Yeah.
So that's, and straight away, initially I was kind of worried because he was quite like just explaining the mission to Bond. But I love how he's like, let's see your gun. And then him and the other guy just laugh at his gun. It's like, did you put that in a woman's bag? Like, what?
yeah, they don't waste any time calling out his gun, do they?
No, and like Bond actually doesn't push back that much in this scene. And I think that's something that they build later on about Bond being the more rebellious kind of agent of the lot. This one, I didn't quite get that sense on there. It did feel like maybe like a schoolmaster just kind of bringing in a student and tearing them down a little bit, laughing at their gun and sorting them out before sending them on their way.
Yeah, and I suppose you just mentioned there about the gun bit of that scene with Boothroyd coming in is obviously not the Q that we come to know. It's just this random guy, and that's the only time we see him.
Yeah, I didn't even associate him with Q. That's how little they set that up. But you're right, this is the equivalent of Q, but in my head, I just thought it was a guy who just had a gun.
Yeah. Yeah, he just says that line about, good for a woman's purse, and then that's it. He just, bye.
But it's smart because everyone knows the Walther PPK as James Bond's gun, but by doing it this way, they actually really get to kind of introduce the weapon and you get to kind of properly see it, and then the guy explains a little bit more about it. I thought that was a really smart way of hammering it in your head that this is Bond's gun and this is what that gun's about.
Yeah, definitely. Although, I mean, I myself can't say that I focus a lot on the gun, but I suppose there is something, I can't remember the exact history of it, but there is definitely something about, probably in the book somewhere, about having a Beretta and then moving to a Walther PPK, and I think Ian Fleming had quite a strong viewpoint on one of those things anyway.
Yeah, because that's one thing that's interesting, because this is the first film in the franchise, but I want to say it's the 6th book overall.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know what number it is, but you're right, because the first one is Casino Royale.
Yeah. And they actually do quite a good job of kind of establishing this as the first film. It doesn't feel incomplete. It doesn't feel like you're kind of missing stuff. Now, I haven't read the book, I'm going to be totally honest, so there might have been stuff they stripped out to make it feel this way. But if they did that, I think they did a really good job. And I think this scene is kind of I don't know whether it's in the book or not, but this scene feels like it makes sense in terms of the first one in the franchise, where it's James Bond getting his iconic weapon in this film, that it kind of makes it feel like the first one.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, I know I haven't read the book either, Dr. No, but I did have a quick look at sort of production-wise and writing it and what changes they would have made. And yeah, I mean, there are some changes. I don't know about this gun thing. There are some weirder changes that we can... There's a giant squid in the book at one point, which we missed out on that visually, which is a shame. But I would have to imagine, because I think the first book they wanted to turn into a film was Thunderball, but that was actually wrapped up still in the Kevin McClory rights malarkey. So they took Dr. No instead, and I imagine they must have tweaked it to be suitable as the first installment.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they were clearly kind of building up to Thunderball because of how big that film was. But back to Dr. No. So the next scene, and I actually quite like this scene for a few reasons. The first note I put about the scene is green walls, because they really stood out to me.
Green walls? Is this at the airport?
No, this is the hotel scene, or the room scene where Bond comes back to his room.
Oh, okay.
So it's just because I think I put green walls because this film is in the 60s and a lot of the sets really are quite striking. because they have that 60s kind of feel to them, which is quite unique. Now, to be fair, over the years, that decor has been brought back and used quite a bit. You know, you can probably see that a little bit more, which makes it a bit less special. But even with this film, it kind of stood out. So when he came into this hotel room, it was like this block green walls everywhere. And I'm like, I think this is meant to be a nice hotel. So I don't know why those walls are so green. But it made me think more about the 60s decor in this film at that point.
Is this the scene with Sylvia Trench again in the golf?
Yes.
Okay, right. I was just trying to place it in my mind. You know, you're actually talking about that is, I thought exactly the same thing as well, about how this film is 60 years old, but there are so many things that I've seen in shops that I could be like, people would buy this. People would buy that thing on the wall over there. People would buy that piece of furniture. It's crazy how things come back around like that.
Yeah, like at some point during our lives, it rotates across. So even if maybe people wouldn't buy it now, you know in 10 years' time, somebody absolutely would.
I've got bright green walls.
Do you?
No, I don't really. I do have granny curtains though, but no green walls, no.
Darn. But I thought it was really nice. There's two things I really liked about this scene. The first is that James Bond is still in his tux, but he gets to use his gun straight away. And he doesn't shoot it, but he hears a noise in the other room. So he gets his PPK out, and then you get that really nice kind of look at Bond. You know, Sean Connery as Bond in the first film in a tux, the classic tux, using the classic weapon. And even though it doesn't go anywhere, it was actually really nice to see that iconic look kind of all come together in this one moment in the room.
Although she doesn't really seem fussed that she has a gun pointed to her, does she? She's just there putting away.
Yeah, she's just like, okay, sure. I guess she had it happen before. I guess that's
maybe.
What happens when he breaks into people's room. But that's something I quite liked as well. I like that the first kind of Bond girl, the first one that he kind of gets with, is someone who actually, they speak together. There's some form of kind of chemistry there. And actually she breaks into his room, where we'll see it quite a lot in this franchise. Bond loves to break into women's rooms. So it was actually quite nice to see the very first Bond girl, or the one he sleeps with. It's the other way round. She breaks into his room, and then they spend the night together.
Yeah, and she's not the the Bond girl that is sort of, oh, James, looks into his eyes dreamily, and she actually has a bit of rapport with James, back and forth. She gives it just as much as he does with little snappy lines and things. And I think in my head, I'm just always associating these early Bond films with just really not great things with women. But it was kind of a bit of a shock to be like, oh, actually, she's quite I think she's actually done quite a good job with this character. She's quite empowered. I think she yeah,
there's not a lot to it, but I was in the same boat where I was expecting this that he just goes in, gives her a good old slap.
Oh no,
because that's coming up. I do remember that happens in films.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's nice that this very first one wasn't like that.
Yes, definitely.
So after that, we go to Jamaica. We've already talked about the Bond theme playing loudly while at the airport. But something I liked about this is that it felt like there was a little bit more weight behind him coming to Jamaica. So in later films and other spy films, you know how it's like a worldwide tour and they just kind of jump between places, and you'll have like a cafe scene and it's like, well, Bond, it looks like you're off to Egypt. And then it's like Egypt and he's just in Egypt.
Yeah.
This one felt like, he got a call, he got a mission, he got on a plane, he got to an airport, he had to travel there, and then they're like, welcome to Jamaica. Like, it feels like a real event that he actually had to travel across the world to Jamaica, which is something they very much lose in the later films.
Well, I suppose that kind of links into, that's a really good point, because obviously it's because they could only really afford to have Jamaica as the shooting place, that and then the sound stages at London. So, they're gonna rinse it for what they can get. But also it has that element of, this is the 60s. People were interested in this character because of the exotic food he ate, the drinks he had, the places he went to. And so having that step by step of visiting another country was probably really interesting to some people watching it at the time. It's not like they just hopped on an EasyJet flight for 25 quid. going to another place in the world was probably a much bigger deal than it is now. So I think that might have been an element to it as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. I guess, yeah, again, they would have had to reflect how people probably would have viewed this. And if James Bond was just suddenly in Jamaica, they'd be like, well, what? Is he an alien? How did he get there?
Did you see how easy security was for him? He literally just walked through, grabbed his briefcase. Oh, if only it was like that now.
But yeah, I don't know what the numbers are in terms of people who actually travel, but even something like going to France was probably a bigger deal back then, right?
Yeah.
It kind of must have been. Yeah. I don't know when the Channel Tunnel was built, but it can't have been around in the 60s.
I think it was in the 90s it was finished, like 1990 maybe?
Yeah, like you couldn't drive there, and it was such a, yeah, like you say, that exotic feeling, the idea of sitting down and watching a film about this much warmer, very different place probably was like quite exciting.
Oh, definitely warmer. We see the sweat.
Oh, yes.
I'm going to keep on about that.
The sweat.
I just remember there being one shot where I was like, I know what it is now. But yeah, my goodness, you're sweaty. With good reason to be as well.
Yeah. And also my next note is love that hat. It's something we haven't mentioned yet, but in quite a lot of this film is wearing a hat. Mm-hmm. And I really like that look for James Bond. It's not one you see a lot, but I actually think it works really well in this film.
Maybe you should wear that hat.
I could do. What type of hat is it?
I can't remember the name of it now.
It can't be Trilby, can it?
No, it's very similar though, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. Have a think about it. I think you could put it off.
Okay. It's worth trying, right?
Yeah.
Can't be that expensive, can they?
No, I want you to get the actual hat that Sean Connery wore.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Just break into a museum somewhere, a film museum, it must be there. But one thing I was going to mention about kind of where this airport scene leads on to, which is that, he soon realizes that there is this person trying to pick him up that is obviously not there for a good reason. And he calls in just to double check if a car had been left for him. And no, well, who's this guy then? But he gets in anyway. And this whole scene between him and the driver that eventually ends in a bit of a tussle, I was actually really impressed by the camera work on this chase scene, because they are chased as well. Because I was very quickly assuming we're going to get some really bad rear projection, where the background is just not lining up at all with what Bond is doing with the steering wheel, and it's just so grainy and just really amateur looking. And so I wrote down like, wow, no bad rear projections, which is really surprising. And then, of course, it does come up later on.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. I had a very similar impression where that was actually very solid, and it kind of worked in terms of the shots they used and the way they put it all together when driving. And I was like, yeah, I was the same. I was solid. But then there's a second one where I don't know what happened, but the second one is such a train wreck that it actually even makes this one seem way better.
Yeah, I mean, just you could tell that they just had the camera plonked on the back of a car and Bond looking behind him, and it did a world of difference knowing that it was actually real compared to the later chase scene, which just has no punch behind it. No.
Something I really like about the cars in this film and these scenes is that they're all like open. What's the bloody word for it? Where you don't have the roof.
Convertibles?
Yeah, they're all convertibles, which makes sense because it's Jamaica, I guess. So I guess that makes sense. And they wouldn't have an aircon if they did have a roof. But I think that's really cool. It's nice to kind of see. It does look a little bit awkward in some scenes, but it's another reason why this film kind of stands out on its own. It's a very subtle thing, but all the cars in this one is just convertibles.
Yeah, I actually hadn't really noticed that, but I guess, the cars themselves, it's just, 60s cars. Looking back to today, it's like, oh, they are nice.
So we got the first fight scene, and the thing that I liked about it, so he has a little fight, he's like, who do you work for? And then he's like... Can I have a cigarette?
And Bond's like, of course.
Yeah, it's the 60s. What, am I going to say no? So he lets him have a cigarette.
It is kind of strange. It is strange thinking about it, yeah.
And of course, he does the old cyanide in the cigarette trick, a classic, and he dies. But it's like, I felt like any other requests, like if the guy was like, "Can I have a sip of water? We're in Jamaica. I'm very hot." He would have been like, "No, tell me what I need to know." But a cigarette? Well, yeah, we're just two gentlemen out having a little fisticuffs. Of course, have a little puff on me. Don't worry about that.
You know, Bond is a nasty guy when he wants to be, but he's not a monster.
No, there's a human somewhere in there.
Yeah.
So then that cuts to him driving up to the hotel, or not the hotel, but the government building, I believe. And I can't remember exactly what he says, but it's the first, like, I've killed someone, let's be pithy about it moment.
There's a dead body right there, but it's time for a joke.
Yeah, I can't remember what he says, but he doesn't make a pun or anything like that. He just drives up and saying it's something like, "Can you search him?" or like something like that.
Yeah, the first of many times having this sort of scene, I suppose.
Yeah, there's a few of them in there, but none of them are like straight jokes. They get very close, but none of them really quite make sense or are quite those kind of iconic lines that you know. And the sick part about this scene is that Bond's driving in the front and the guy is sitting up in the back.
Yeah.
So Bond took the corpse after it died and sat him up, and I'm assuming put a seatbelt on him. I don't know. Like, he didn't just put him in the trunk. He didn't just lie him in the back. He sat him up to make it look like he's a passenger.
Wow, you really put some thought into these scenes. I had not even considered some of these sort of aspects of it, but I suppose you're right.
Yeah, like, I guess maybe you could say, well, him looking like a passenger probably makes him look less suspicious, but it's still very much a corpse just sitting up there.
Yeah.
And all just for that first humorous bit of the film. I don't think there's been a few kind of humorous moments at the before this point, but that one was very clearly framed as like a comedy bit that Bond is going to drive up and have a dead person sitting up in his car and be like, "Oh, what's up with this guy?" Oh, then walk off.
People loved dead bodies back in the day, Tom. It was hilarious.
Oh, it was the thing. Everyone
Times
was
are different,
about
you know. Yeah.
It's Vietnam that ruined those jokes, I think.
I'd have to agree.
And something I put at this point, and I did mentioning about it earlier, it is very well paced, this film, and it's, especially the first half of the film, it's quite fast paced. We've already done quite a lot. I don't know what the minute mark is for where we've got up to, but they've set up the film, they've set up what the mission is, they've set up this character, they've had him go to a different place, they've had this chase scene, they've had a fight scene, and then they've had this comedy scene, and now he's in that. Like, it's going quite fast, or faster than I would expect from a film of around this era.
Yeah, and I suppose that kind of, we should also mention, you know, plot-wise, it's not overly complicated. It's basically American rockets and missiles are being tampered with, and go investigate it, basically. But I think because it is such a simple plot, you're right, it doesn't need to have all these different plot points connected to each other and different characters and all this sort of stuff. And actually, what that means is, I don't know, I can't remember how long this film is. I think it might be about, an hour and 40 minutes or something?
It's under 2 hours, for sure.
Yeah. It just goes by very nicely. Like, there's nothing that it lingers on for too long, because there's not really much to linger on, to be honest with you.
No. And to jump ahead a little bit, one of my future notes was kind of like, this format that they use for this film and this plot is something they could not do again, because it's so to the point. It's so, Bond goes to a place, does a bit of investigation, takes out a bad guy, leaves, that it works in the film's favor. But the franchise after this point definitely had to add in more elements to make it a bit more interesting, because it's so to the point. It's just like, he goes somewhere, he explores around, here's a person, here's another person, there's a bad guy, he takes out the bad guy. Spoilers.
What? No.
I know.
No, you're right. It is a very sensible idea of what an agent would do. You know, they would go to the place and they would figure out what's going on. They wouldn't jet around to 7 different places across the world because they needed to show off more countries like they eventually needed to with the later films. And I think that's actually one of the reasons why I quite liked this film in the end. Yeah.
So that ties in nicely to the next scene, which is quite brief, but he goes to the crime scene where the woman was murdered. and then takes a look around and finds some clues and stuff, which I thought was really nice to actually see James Bond at the scene of a crime of a place where early in the film we saw that crime be committed.
Yeah, it's kind of like when people say, oh, it's nice to see Batman actually do some detecting because he is a detective. And it's in the kind of same vein of it's nice to see Bond actually look around and investigate and not just going and shoot things up and schmooze some women. But and there's actually parts of this later on where he does some kind of spy tricks, and it's actually just nice to see him do things like that.
Yeah, 100%. It just, I think that shot of him being in that same place where it happened, I don't know if any other film does that. Because normally if Bond is investigating something, you don't see it beforehand. So you're kind of in the same position as Bond trying to figure it out. But this time you know what went down there. And yes, there's still stuff you're trying to figure out along with the character, like who is Dr. No and things like that. But I'm not even sure at this point James Bond knows who Doctor No is.
Yeah.
And it's kind of nice to see him just go to this place and just go through that process. It's very much a process for him as a spy to figure this stuff out in this way. And it's just nice to see that so clearly, I guess.
Yeah, and also just to see Bond knowledgeable as well. Not to say that it's always looking dumb, but you know, the guy, I don't know who that character is exactly, some commissioner or something that's with him in the nice shorts, lovely shorts by the way he's wearing. He says something about, oh, you know, we haven't been able to contact, and Bond's like, well, yeah, we would have shut down because of what's happened. It's just like he's very quick to say, this is why. Like he actually knows his stuff. It's like, yeah, good for you.
Yeah, it's a nice little scene for sure in terms of setting him up as a spy for the rest of the film. So the next one, I think the first shot of this next scene is it starts on the Smirnoff vodka bottle.
Yes, you're right.
I don't know if you saw it, but to me that was clear as day that was Smirnoff. Like it wasn't a generic vodka, it was a bottle of Smirnoff vodka.
Oh yeah, the words were right there. Yeah, it was like turned towards the camera. You could definitely see it.
And I guess there was two things that stood out to me about this one. The first is that the way that the vodka martini drink is introduced is very casual. It's just like, hey, here's your favorite drink, and they just have all that stuff out there, and then it's just like, yeah, vodka martini. We didn't, or we shook it, I guess, or whatever he says. Like he doesn't say the line. James Bond isn't even talking. It's just the guy saying, yep, we made you a drink. Here you go. It's just how you like it.
Yeah, I think he actually says, because I did notice that it doesn't even say shaken. I think he says mixed or something, mixed, not stirred. Like you wanted, and it is very low key. You know, you don't get the whole shaken, not stirred line. It's just, he just wants his vodka. That's it.
Yeah, it feels more like a nod to the people who know the books rather than trying to establish it as a proper thing associated to James Bond.
Although, did it annoy you? This is one of my notes. This just kind of goes to show what I found noteworthy to write down. People constantly just leaving drinks behind in this film. I swear he had one sip of that vodka martini and then just walked off. And I think Quarrel does it later on when he's got a beer. He has one sip and then just walks off. I'm like, finish your drinks, people.
I didn't notice that, but if everyone finished their drinks, everyone would be like drunk, like in a really bad way. So it's probably for the best they don't finish those drinks.
That's true. I mean, yeah, Bond is definitely a functioning alcoholic, but maybe that's why, because he just has little sips throughout the day.
Like that's another thing. So in terms of the functioning alcoholic angle, you know, which is something people have talked about a lot, but it was interesting to see this be the case straight away in the very first film, because this is just during the day. Like it's bright outside and it's just in a hotel room and he's just gotten the guy to make him a vodka martini. It's like, it's really weird that he would even have a drink like this.
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, he is working. I was about to say, you know, he's in Jamaica, but it's not a holiday. he's there for a reason.
Yeah, he's working. Yeah, again, during the day. It's a very hot climate as well. I don't know. I've never been to Jamaica, but I can't imagine if I went to Jamaica, I would be ordering vodka martinis. That seems like a very inappropriate drink to have during that place. I think Jamaica is more known for like spiced rums and things like that.
Let's be honest. You'll be on the white wine spritzers.
Yeah. Well, if I want to have a crazy night, I would be.
I have a white wine spritzer. Yeah.
Again, to me, it stood out. I was like, yep, James Bond has always been a functioning alcoholic. Cool. Good to know.
Right off the bat. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that the scene? This is the scene now where he does that thing where he sets up the room for basically being burgled in, and has sort of, you know, the dust on the briefcase clips and the hair across the wardrobe, and that's sort of what I was referring to a little while ago about it's this very simple things. You would never see Bond doing this in a later Bond film, really. Just very, very plain things. There's no gadgets. It's just him with a bit of hair across the wardrobe to see if it's been opened later on, and a bit of dust. I guess that's what you have when you have no queue and no money.
Yeah, I mean, it feels so smart because it would just work what he's doing. It would work. You would not see the hair on the door, but of course somebody opens that up, it's going to break. It's such a small kind of subtle little idea, and this film is kind of littered with all these sort of things, like very practical solutions to things. I think that's the word I would kind of use to describe a good chunk of this film. It's very practical. It's like it's a guy, but Bond is just a guy, so he has to kind of find solutions that just a random guy in a place he's never been would find. And I always find that hair thing such a cool little thing to do. Like, it feels very spy, but just to the point where it would work, but there's nothing fancy about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so the next scene is when we're introduced to the fisherman. And I can't remember his name. I don't know if you can.
Good old Quarrel.
Oh, it's Quarrel. Yes, my bad. I really like this character. There's not a whole lot to him, but he gets quite a lot of personality in his small scenes that he does get.
Yeah, I thought that too. Let's not beat around the bush. It's not a great end for Quarrel in the film. No. But I think I was actually quite sad when that happened, even though they just completely glossed over it. But I think that kind of goes to show that, yeah, with the small amount of screen time, well, no, I guess he was in the film quite a lot, but I guess just, you know, not a massive amount of dialogue between them all. It really kind of made an impression on me. I think he's just quite a lovable character in a way. Maybe not lovable, but it's just warm to him.
Yeah, he's just solid. He is somewhat funny, but not super funny. He doesn't, like you say, he doesn't stand out a lot, but because he is in quite a few scenes, and just, I think this is probably the actor's doing, really. I think the actor sells him very well as this kind of fisherman who's kind of tied into the CIA and things like that. But I love the scene where he's fighting Bond, because initially he has the knife, and then he does like this weird things with his eyes. And the actor does it in quite a few scenes where he just does these like weird little moments where it doesn't really make sense.
Wait, what does he do with his eyes? I did notice he did have quite big eyes, but I don't know what he did with them.
I wish I had the scene right up, but he just looks odd when he brings that knife out and he's giving Bond this like weird look. Like, I think he's trying to give a look of, I'm going to stab you, but it's not very convincing or threatening.
Okay, right. I see.
And then you get, this scene is so great. It maybe not for the right reasons, but you get him where he's trying to be quite serious, where he's got the knife and then the guy grabs him, they have a fight. And then you go into the classic, throw the henchman into a load of boxes.
So many boxes.
It's so many boxes. They just go everywhere.
Why are there so many empty boxes there? Fold them up. Put them in the recycling.
I'm going to guess it's just more of a practical stunt thing, where rather than getting proper stunt mats or anything like that, they want them to throw to the floor and have impact. So just put a load of boxes that will just go everywhere when they go into them. Yeah.
I mean, it worked. It was fine. Yeah.
But it goes from shifty eyes with the knife to falling into all these boxes in a crazy way. And then the American agent shows up, and then the fisherman goes straight to being super smiley and nice. Like, it's like instantly. He's like, hey, no problem, friend. Just a bit of a sore wrist. Don't worry about it.
Definitely a bit of whiplash in that scene. I mean, I liked what they were doing. I think it could have maybe been a little bit slower, because it is just instantly, like you say, like, I'm going to stab you. Oh, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, and then that melts into the next scene, which also happens very quickly, where it fades into happy music and they're all sitting in a bar, hanging out, having a chat.
Oh, this scene. Yeah. This scene, I think... I really want to like this scene because it has... Well, I mean, it has some interesting and kind of vital plot points within it about Crab Key and all this sort of stuff. But every time, this is one thing I actually did remember about this film ahead of time is this lady who's the photographer. I just do not like this actress, and I think she really kind of ruins any good feeling that this scene might have had for me. I think she's terrible.
Yeah, I think it doesn't help that it's a little bit of a pointless character. Like,
Yes.
I think what they were trying to do is set up like Dr. No is everywhere and he has people everywhere. But they've kind of already done that a lot and do that a lot after this scene. But having someone so unsubtly go up to them, take a picture with flash photography, only to instantly then just kind of get captured, it doesn't really build as part of that. You just don't feel like, oh, that he has spies everywhere, because she was just like, went up to them and just went, ch-ch, and then left. It's like, what do you think was going to happen?
Yeah. Like, why would, she just didn't even make an effort to leave relatively quickly either. Because it's not as if they did it really quickly to go and get, like, Quarrel to go get her. But I just think, she just wasn't a very good actress, this lady. And I think some of her deliveries of lines was just really, really hammy. And, the whole you rats, that sort of thing. Every time I watch that, I'm just like, oh, get on with it. Get her off. Get away.
Yeah, luckily it's quite short. And for people who don't remember this scene, it is quite a short scene, to be fair. It's just they're all hanging out at the bar after a little bit of a fight. Bond, the American agent, and the fisherman. And then they're talking about Crab Key and what's going on there. But then this woman just comes up, takes a picture of them. So they just grab her and then just like, why did you do that? And she's just clearly lying. And then it just kind of goes nowhere. And then they decide to do something different anyway. I guess the most notable thing about this scene is the woman. Now, what was that thing she attacked?
I had the exact same question. I was just about to say this. So I had to kind of go back and rewatch this. I'm pretty sure it's her like flash bulb that she smashes, but then Quarrel just sort of wipes it off, and it was red. So it's like, okay, yeah, he's bleeding from something, but he just got smacked in the face with like shards of glass, and he's just like, yeah, quick wipe off, that's fine.
Yeah, that's great. To me, it looked a little bit more solid, so it wasn't the bulb. But now that you say it's the bulb, that makes total sense.
I think so. I think that's
it's the only thing it could be, I guess.
I guess so, but it's just such a strange reaction from Quarrel. He's fine.
Yeah,
he's
he gets
a tough guy.
Slashed across the face, and I don't know what he said. I tried to write it down because I also rewrote it, but it's like, we don't get, and then it's like something, want me to break her arm. But I don't know what he said. I couldn't understand it.
Yeah, he was straight. Didn't waste any time about arm breaking.
So a very odd scene, but we do kind of get the whole. I think the whole scene ends with the line, "Who puts that kind of fear into people?" So yeah, again, it ties into what I was saying before. They want to kind of set Dr. No up as being very fearful, and it's something that I think overall they do quite a good job of. Not that I feel like this film is too tense. I don't think I ever really felt any proper tension, but they do a good job of adding in all these little reasons to kind of, here's Dr. No and his influence without actually seeing Dr. No. Yeah,
totally. I mean, you don't see him until the end, and you don't hear him until quite far through the film. So I guess this is the best way that they can do that through other people's fears, and maybe I can forgive the terrible photographer actress for that. Maybe.
So this actually ends, I think the US agent says it's a Chinese gentleman, Dr. No, which weirded me out a bit. I'm like, I don't think he is Chinese, but okay, I'll go with it.
Do you mean the character or the actor?
Well, he just says that he's Chinese, like the guy in the film. I guess both, I suppose.
I had memories of him being Chinese, but then when you actually saw him on screen, I was like, yeah, that's another. This is a you only live twice situation here. Like, he is not Chinese.
No, it's not even
no
close.
Definitely not.
So it was also interesting that they say Dr. No, and similar to the other scene, it's a very quick fade into the next scene. Like, to the point where I'm pretty sure he hasn't even said no fully, and it's fading out to the next one already.
Where does it lead to next? What is the next scene?
So the next scene is Bond going to see the professor,
Ah, yes.
Where we get a
yes.
little bit of an awkward moment where people try to shoot Bond, but a car just drive past and they all just like, oh, a car, and freak out. And then that's that. I guess they just go home, but all right, fine.
Is this where the car just explodes for no reason?
No, we're getting there though.
Oh, okay.
This
Fine,
is a
never
very
mind.
short scene. I can understand why you forget it. It's a very short scene. You see Bond walking into the professor's lab.
Oh,
or whatever
yeah, I know what you
call
mean
it.
now.
And
Yeah.
then there's a group of, I think, the three blind mice.
They
guys.
just get spooked by a car.
Yeah, so they're waiting to shoot him. A car goes past, they get spooked, they miss their shot, and then just go home. Which the professor is on Dr. No's side. If those three guys just entered into the professor's lab after him, would have been the end of the film right there.
That's true. Maybe they were just tired.
Yeah. They've had a big day of murdering.
Yeah, it's exhausting.
Yeah, and I don't want to get too YouTuber, internet-y, nitpicky with these sort of things. But it does kind of, I think, frame these characters more as comic relief. You know, we saw them as the three blind mice before. So even though they have killed people and they're trying to kill Bond, it does somewhat take the whole, oh no, they're trying to kill Bond feeling. And that kind of just disappears when you see it and the way that scene plays out. And I don't know if you even ever see them again after that scene. I think that's it.
Yeah, I can't really remember either, to be honest, which I guess kind of goes to show. Yeah, I think that, and especially when they have that, you can always tell when a character is meant to be kind of a bit comic relief, because they have to have the reactions as well, and they have their sort of like oh, and all these sort of like, you know, really overreactive.
Yeah, like
faces.
the Three Stooges. Something
Exactly.
Like
Yeah.
that. So I don't have too much to say about the professor scene.
So I did have a note for this, which was
Okay.
basically, so Professor Dent, and I had, so in this scene, Bond's going to ask about some of the some rocks that Strangways had as a receipt that he paid Professor Dent to go and investigate and sort of see if they're, I don't know, something along those lines. And so Bond is there asking him about what he knows about Strangways, who was killed earlier in the film, and I just put down that I got very heavy L.A. Noire when someone is lying vibes, like, and you have the sort of visual clues that you have to go off of, because Bond asks this character, and it's just so, again, I don't want to be too YouTubery and cinema sins, you know, but it's so bad the way he kind of tries to get Bond off the case. His face with all these terrible, like shifting his eyes to the side, and I just thought it was kind of a bit cheesy.
I feel like it was somewhat intentional. Like, it didn't really stand out too much to me because, yeah, sure, maybe it's a little bit over the top, but I think it's supposed to be to the audience. You're supposed to come away saying, well, that guy is blatantly lying and is blatantly not telling the truth. Maybe they did go a bit too ham with it, but I feel like it was somewhat intentional, that direction.
But then is it not very soon after that you get Dent going to Dr. No? I feel like
it's literally the next scene.
It is the next scene. I just feel like that. Yeah, I guess you're right.
But you're not wrong in what you're saying. But I could kind of buy it as like it's very silly, but you kind of want to be seeing what Bond is seeing. That maybe Bond would pick up on more subtle clues, but I guess they wanted the audience to know that Bond knows that he's lying.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So maybe not very well done, but I think there is at least a filmmaking reason to why he hammed it up and went all L.A. Noire. Although, like you say, you never want to go full L.A. Noire.
No, there's one character in particular. It really reminded me. Really did remind me.
So this next scene, as we said, it's Professor Dent going to visit Dr. No. And I really like this scene overall. It was actually very striking, the way the framing is in this film. Or this scene.
Yeah, so this scene, I remember reading, or perhaps it was on a documentary or director's commentary about it. I remember about this scene in particular, because of the such a low budget they had for this film, that the set designer Ken Adam was kind of struggling to make these sets on the budget he had and make them look good. And so I think I read somewhere that it might have been Wikipedia to be fair, but like this set cost about £700 to make, because it's literally it's 3 walls basically, and just a really good use of lighting to have that big shadow of the kind of skylight looming over, and keeping it so minimal with that chair and a desk, and you hearing Dr. No for the first time, and him having that. It's almost a bit of a cliche now about the Bond villain, or just a villain in general, having the very kind of soft voice, creepy soft voice. He doesn't sound like a big angry guy. It's just this kind of very gentle, uneasy voice instead. But I think in this scene, it really, really works.
Yeah, I think this scene kind of proves why they started doing that for future films as well, because it does work. And it feels, I mean, they did such a good job, as you say, with so little, setting this scene up. You're in the villain's base, even without any dialogue or anything like that. You just see it. You get the sense of how the room feels like huge, but it's not actually that big at the same time, and the grate looming over. It's just so... It's probably the best shot in the whole film, to be honest. I can't think of any I like more.
Stylistically, yeah, really, really good. Really good.
And it's quite interesting. We talked about James Bond and his introduction quite early on, and how they kind of built it up. And something I quite like about this film is the parallels to how they introduced Bond and how they introduced Dr. No, because they use a lot of the same techniques, but rather than James Bond having it be a very condensed version where it happens very quickly, instead with Dr. No, they use a lot of the same techniques. They just stretch that out over the length of the film to make it have more weight. So I really actually like how they introduce these two characters, the hero and the villain, in a very similar way, but also just on a very different time frame.
That's that is a good point. I didn't really see that before, but I think with the Dr. No character, I mean, I don't know whether when you actually do see him, it's a bit of a letdown. I don't think it was bad, but for how much you don't see him in this film, is a really good villain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll certainly get to the revealing of Dr. No, but we're so close to such a great scene. And it starts with the end of this one, where I think they did so many things right with this current scene in that room. And then it just pans over to this tarantula in a cage.
Mm-hmm.
It just made me laugh straight away, because it's like, I know what's coming. And just the idea of how sinister and how they set this all up, and Dr. No, then Dr. No is like, look in that box over there. I think you'll find what you're looking for. And it's just a tarantula. And it's like, okay, cool.
No, but it's a very deadly poisonous tarantula, Tom.
That's true.
Very.
It would do the job. You'd think it's like, as long as he doesn't have a shoe, our plan will go perfectly.
You could just shoot him when you put the tarantula in the room, but no.
That's what I'm saying. It's like the professor and the Three Blind Mice people try to kill Bond with guns, and Dr. No is like, why are you wasting your time with that nonsense? I've got this pretty furry looking spider thing going on. That will get the job done, no problem.
Yeah, it is a little bit like, huh? But also it does lead to quite a good scene, I thought.
So let's get to it, right? There is another short scene of Bond coming back to the room, finding that someone has been in his room. I don't think he really does anything about it apart from have another vodka martini. That was his solution to that problem.
Yes, but wisely not from the bottle that had been opened. So
no, yeah, there we go. So I guess that's the payoff there. I guess but you would have known that anyway. I like the hair thing, but there's no payoff to it, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's true.
So then we get the spider scene, and I was surprised how quickly it gets into it. It's like I was saying before, this film is quite fast paced for what it is. It doesn't mess around by having the spider kind of crawl up onto the bed or things like that. Because I did think of the Attack of the Clones scene, where it's very similar to this and was probably very much inspired by this scene.
Attack of the Clones? What, Star Wars?
Yeah.
I have not seen Attack of the Clones in a long, long time. I have no memory of what you're talking about.
So briefly, it's pretty much this scene where Padme at the start of that film is they're trying to kill her. So they have some sort of, I want to say it's like a robotic millipede or something, comes in through the window and then tries to kill her. And then I think Anakin breaks in at the last second and lightsabers it. But it's very much the same as this scene.
That's actually very interesting. You say it was like a robotic millipede, right?
I think so. I haven't seen it because it's a bad film in a while, but it's very similar to this one.
Well, because I say that because apparently in the book, it's actually a deadly centipede rather than a tarantula. But they obviously wanted to make it a bit more, have a bit more visual impact with a spider than a centipede.
Yeah, again, and it was probably a good job as well, especially the way it moves. Like, I'm not really afraid of spiders, but as silly as this scene is, if somebody was afraid of spiders, I could see just seeing a tarantula on someone's shoulder, that as an image is quite striking for some, or quite like, no, thank you, nope.
Yeah. I mean, it is just a spider, right? There's not huge amounts of at stake. I mean, unless you have to kind of put your mind in like, this is a deadly spider. If Bond gets bit, he's going to die, right? Which is fine, but I think with those shots and they have that sort of. I think it might only been on one shot because actually if you look at it too long, it does look kind of bad. But they have a bit of glass pressed up against Sean Connery and then the spider on one side because you can see sort of where his shoulder's being pushed by the glass. But, it's on screen for a fleeting second and it does the job. And then it just obviously cuts back to the stuntman with it on his shoulder. One thing I really liked about this scene is it kind of got a bit not musical, but very theatrical with the soundtrack when he's beating it with the shoe, and you sort of have those blasts of horns and whatever alongside it, and it's kind of like I don't think I'd ever see that in another Bond film. That element of linking the music so clearly to actions on screen like that, but it was good. I liked it.
No, I can't think of it, but I think what made that bit stand out where he hits the shoe or he uses the shoe to kill it, which you don't see because it's behind the bed, because obviously they wouldn't actually kill a spider that way. But yeah, it's like, 4 or 5 hits, and all of them are synced up to the music, where it's quiet and then dun, 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 like that.
Yeah.
But the fact that he does it so many times is what I think makes it really stand out as the music syncing up. Like if he did it twice, hit down twice, you probably wouldn't notice it, I don't feel.
Yeah, and he gets, all his hair goes all over. That's why I was saying he is incredibly sweaty, because I'm sure you would be if you had a big tarantula on your shoulder. But it's just like his face is so close to the camera, you can just see all of the sweat sort of like glistening on his face. But yeah, by the end of the scene, he does not look good. Like he's just.
It made me laugh so much, this scene, more than any. And I wouldn't say it's bad or anything like that, but the fact that it keeps cutting to this really close up, sweaty Sean Connery. It was just so good. I would imagine that this actually ties into what you were saying before about how in the 60s, someone going to Jamaica, that in itself was a big deal and didn't make sense. And I feel like this tarantula scene ties into that theme of going to somewhere more exotic and having an exotic creature you don't recognize. I don't know what life was like in the 60s, but I don't know if people really ever saw tarantulas ever. Like, could you go to a zoo and see one? You obviously wasn't watching any on TV, most probably. So I felt like maybe people not even understanding too well what that is. They probably knew like, oh, that's a spider, or they might even know that's a tarantula. But the very idea of going to somewhere exotic and having this very deadly creature crawling on you in the night, that probably in itself was a lot more terrifying back then than it would be now.
Absolutely. Yeah. I suppose I didn't really consider the animals being the exotic part as well. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know how many people, I don't know whether they had those sort of things in zoos, like you say. But I the scene of Sean Connery and just that ultra close up shot of his face. I just imagine the director there just being like, "We need more sweat. It's not sweaty enough. Get the buckets."
I didn't see Sweat Boy in the credits, but he deserved to be credited. Get more buckets. That's so much water.
Get the sweat buckets. Yeah,
come on.
I liked it though. Good scene.
I do like it, but I feel like, and it actually made me think of you during this scene, because I feel like how I feel about this scene is probably how you feel about some of the more campy elements of the Roger Moore films.
Yeah.
Where, yes, it's silly. Yes, it's a bit... Yeah, it's a very silly scene, but I can just enjoy, even though it doesn't work on the level it probably is going for with the tension and being like on the edge of your seat, I can just really enjoy this scene. I come away being like, that was great. I loved it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So after that, we cut to the next day, and it's a very subtle thing, this, where Bond is just fine. It's one of those where it kind of makes him look cool, but in a more subtle way, because even though he was sweating all night, thanks to a hairy spider, he's just totally fine and doesn't even kind of mention it. And I think that adds to his character in a very small way than like an action scene would.
Yeah, sometimes it's what is not said is just as important as what is said. Totally.
And then we get to a character who, this whole sequence with her, I don't know, man. I don't know. So it's the woman that's like spying on them.
Oh, I wrote down her name because I forgot it as well. Miss Taro. Taro?
Yes, something like that. This whole sequence, I'm not a big fan of it. I don't think it's particularly bad, but I think in terms of the pacing of the film and everything, I feel like this kind of sequence and how it plays out is probably the worst part of the film for me.
I do agree that I don't really like that character. I get what they're trying to do. It's kind of like what you said about more people being within the web of Dr. No, like you just can't avoid him sort of thing.
Yeah.
But I think it maybe just she overstayed her welcome a bit with this film, because ultimately she doesn't really do much.
No, again, like you said, it doesn't bring down the film. It doesn't really have a big impact on it overall. It's just kind of like, I kind of wish this wasn't there. So it starts with him asking her out. And actually, we do have scenes that break this up. So, which is another reason why I would say her character doesn't bring things down too much, because it's not just her and Bond for like 20 minutes or anything. There are breaking scenes. So after that, you have a scene where they're in the boat with Quarrel. And this is the first time you hear about a dragon.
Mm-hmm.
I think the exact quote, because I wrote it down, is, "You see, there's a dragon."
Uh-huh.
And the dragon was also another part that I wasn't a massive fan of. But I guess we'll get there when we get there.
Yeah, quite right.
So then this goes on to the telephone message scene where he has a message and then he calls back the woman who's just like swooning on her bed like a teenager.
Yeah. And
I couldn't describe it better than what I put in my notes, which is just bit cringe. I was just like, this is just ridiculous. Like, they would frame it like this and she would act like basically a teenager.
Why does she have to do that when he can't see her? Like, she obviously does not. She's obviously bad. I mean, I suppose it's for the audience because we don't really know that yet. But there are like little clues about what's she up to, sort of thing, listening behind the door. But it's just, it is kind of a bit. That sort of leans into the whole sort of, oh, James, sort of, where the women just fall over themselves to him. It's just like, yeah, all right, come on, easy now.
Yeah, and some of this stuff is kind of justified in the plot of the film, but I don't think it's kind of justified enough to have it play out the way it does. So she calls him up and says, come to this building, which again, like you say, there's hints in there. So some people are probably like, well, she's evil, so this is a trap, but Bond probably wants to go into the trap. Does Bond know it's a trap or things like that? And then you have something that made me laugh as well, where he's driving along, but he just looks tiny in the car. It's another convertible scene. And for some reason, to me, he just looks like a little tiny like stick man or like a toy person or something like that sticking out of this car going along. I don't know if it was just like they didn't actually shoot it for real on if it was a model or if it was just the way it was framed. But for some reason, he looked really silly driving around in the car.
I'm gonna have to go back and watch that. It didn't stick out to me, but I'm curious.
If you are going to rewatch it, something that I think happened is that I think he starts with a hat in the car, and then it cuts to the next one, and he doesn't have the hat anymore. So if you do rewatch it, you let me know. Does his hat just disappear in that scene?
Answering the real questions on this podcast.
Well, I need to know.
Yes.
Not enough to watch it again, apparently, but I would like to know.
I'll give you an update.
Thank you. And then this all ties into a chase scene, which is the one we alluded to earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is it a green screen or is it a blue screen? Or did they not even use screens back then?
I think it's. I originally wrote green screening, but I'm pretty sure they didn't have green screening back then. It's basically they had a projector. I think it's called rear projection, where they projected it onto a screen behind this fake car, and that was how it was done.
Okay. Yeah, like I think you see those, don't you, where it's like kind of a car moving in, like going forward, and yeah, I think I know what you mean. Like I think certain shows will reference that type of shots and way of getting those shots.
Yeah.
So this whole scene is another one where I love it, but for the wrong reasons.
Okay.
The car behind is just so huge when they cut to Sean Connery in the car. Like, it's a monster car. It just doesn't match up at all to the chase scene.
Yeah, that is the problem with these sort of things, this sort of rear projection stuff. And equally, Bond is there on hands on the wheel, but there is very little correlation between what he is doing and what is going on and how much camera shaking there is with this footage they're using. It's just very sloppy.
Yeah, they just didn't do a good job with it. Yeah, like you say, Sean Connery's just driving it like he's a kid who's got in his first wheel.
Whee!
Yeah. But his face is great as well because he's trying, but he pulls all these weird, like, determined faces, but almost like his... I don't know how I would describe the emotions that Sean Connery pulls off. Either he's an amazing actor or he shouldn't be acting at all. It's one of those. But there's so much range and weirdness going on with his face when he's pretending to drive this car.
I didn't pick up on that, but I'm sure. Yeah, more things I need to go back and rewatch. But I can probably imagine, because there are later points in other films where he does really go for it with these facial expressions. Yeah,
it's probably a little bit more subtle in this one than later films. But I just don't think he got any good direction. Or if there was a director there saying, hey, or Terrence Young, I believe, if he was telling him stuff, it was the wrong stuff. So he's just putting this, like, not confused face, but just like he just didn't know what to do with it. So he just pulls these odd kind of faces where, well, it's Sean Connery, right? So he doesn't emote that much anyway. So imagine someone who can't emote trying to emote a lot and not knowing what to emote. And that's how I would sum up this scene.
Yeah. And then... you might have to remind me about how it actually all plays out, because it's not, in the grand scheme of Bond car chases, it's obviously very low key. They are just driving, and Bond goes under something.
There's like a yellow crane or something like. It's similar to a crane.
And the car chasing him realizes they won't fit, so they sort of swerve and then just swerve off the edge.
It's so good. This might also be one of my favorite scenes in the film, because like you say, he goes underneath and then the black car, rather than just stopping, falls off this cliff. And it starts off just a small car crash and it just keeps going. It keeps just falling down this massive hill, and then halfway through it just explodes for no reason.
It's gotta explode. It has to explode.
It's so good. And then it just ends like with it at the bottom, like this flame ball. So I don't know how they did this, and it would be quite interesting finding out how they shot this scene, because it seems like they just pushed it down this long hill. I say cliff because it is quite steep, but it also seems to be quite long. And I can't imagine they did this more than once. So they just pushed it down. And I wonder if they did put any explosions or anything in the car and then just set those off as it was falling. Because it feels like that's what they did.
I'd have to imagine, yeah. They just had, let it fall for X amount of feet, then push the button, giant fireball, let's get this done. Come on, we want to go home.
It's just, it escalates from, oh no, there's a crane in the road, to like fireball of death falling down the mountain, and it just doesn't really add up, but because it goes that way, it's just awesome. I just love it.
And then is there like a worker by the crane?
Yeah.
Who's just like, yeah. It just doesn't care.
Yeah, it was just like, what's up with that? And then we get a line from Bond. I don't know if you remember it.
I do not know.
So again, this is what I was saying before about there's no real puns, and there's attempts at jokes, but they don't quite make sense. I don't think so anyway. Maybe there's something I missed. But he says, I think they were on their way to a funeral. which I guess he says that because they're dead.
Because they're going to their own funeral?
I guess it's their funeral they're going to. There's an effort, but not much of an effort.
It's not great. Yeah, it's not his best.
So after that, Bond then actually makes it to the place. And by this point, when she answers the door, she's very shocked to see Bond. So anyone that doesn't think she's evil, that pretty much confirms that she is on the side of Dr. No at that point.
Yeah, well, and if it's not then it's definitely the phone call.
Yes.
That's sort of like, come on, she's bad.
But this whole scene, it just plays out very weirdly where these sort of scenes can be interesting where she's bad and Bond kind of knows, but they both have to keep up that act of not knowing with each other and kind of trying to be naive to try and get something out of the other person. But this one just didn't really work for me. He straight away kisses her and then takes her towel, and it almost looks like he sniffs the towel.
Well, I spotted this as well because I thought, okay, if you're like that, you might sniff a towel. I don't know. If you're Bond, you might sniff a towel. But,
you might sniff a towel, yeah.
But it's like he bit the towel. Did you? It looks like he actually puts it in his mouth briefly.
I didn't see but he definitely brings it very close.
Maybe I just saw that, but I thought he was starting to eat the towel, which I was just wondering what on earth is going on.
That would have been great.
Sniffing is not enough, clearly.
Yeah, I think that's the new Bond film, isn't it? Sniffing is not enough.
I'd watch that.
I would, yeah.
But yeah, I think this whole scene, I mean, it's just like with the phone call she gets and she's, oh yeah, he's here. What happened sort of thing. And I can keep him for another 2 hours. It's just very on the nose, isn't it? It's very on the nose.
Yeah, and they then sleep together and she's trying to keep him there and he's trying to also set her up. And, it's a nice little reveal at the end where the taxi he's called for is actually his guys to come and arrest her and take her away. That's a nice little payoff to it. But it just feels getting to that point. It's just a bit didn't really kind of need this. I put in my notes at the end, she spits on him. Seems fair. I was like, fair enough to her, because she ends up, as she gets taken away, just spitting on him, and then she drives away.
I was quite taken aback by the spit in the face. I don't know, I really wasn't expecting that. I just don't think that's really something I would have ever thought of seeing in a Bond film, someone getting spat in the face.
Well, she's a villain, so
yeah. He lives up to it.
Villain spit sometimes.
The thing is as much as this scene was a bit rubbish and yeah. It does lead into what is probably one of the best scenes of the film for me.
Yes. It's a great scene.
Yeah. So, she's been taken away, but he knows that there are people coming for him. So he hangs around, kind of sets up the scene as if they're still in the room, pours a couple of drinks, throws his coat over a chair, plumps up the bed to make it look like there are some bodies in there, and then very calmly gets his gun, gets a silencer, sits down by the door, and just starts playing some solitaire. And waits ultimately waits for Professor Dent to come in. It's very quiet. It's a very quiet scene, and it's just very it's just cool. You know what I mean? It is just very cool, this whole scene.
Yeah, he just takes his time in a way that's quite satisfying, I suppose. Where this is going, what's going to happen, but seeing him understand that and not being rushed and just puts it together and takes it so casually to the point where he finds a pack of cards somewhere. I'm assuming he didn't bring them.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he did. Just to then take it so casually to play that sort of game. It definitely kind of sets him up as being this cool person that they're trying to convey with this first film. Yeah.
And then obviously, Professor Dent does come in and sees what he thinks is the bodies in the bed and gives them specifically 6 shots. and what do you know? Bond's there, he catches them out, and you sort of have this little back and forth. And it's just, this is what I mean, where it's like it sets Bond up as such a cool character where he knows he doesn't have any more shots left in his gun, right, Professor Dent. So he knows that he's trying to claw it over with his foot to try and catch him off guard.
Is it? It's not subtle at all.
But he's just there pretending not to notice. Looking at the card, looking at the gun, letting Dent think that he's onto something with his plan. And obviously he goes to shoot Bond and he's run out of bullets. And then you get the cool line from Bond, which is
I don't know. I didn't write it down.
oh, it's something like, that's a Smith and Wesson, and you've had your 6, and then bam.
Ah, yes.
And it's just like one of those little lines you just go, yeah, after he says it.
So it's also another example of it's a very simple plan as well.
Yeah.
Like we've mentioned it a few times, we might mention it again, but a lot of these solutions are very simple. It's something that kids do to fool their parents. Like, just set it up and put pillows under a blanket, but it works, and he kind of pulls it off. Something Absolutely. I will say about this scene, and I don't know if you noticed it as well, but the audio for the professor is off.
Really?
It's really like, I want to say like tinny and slightly robotic compared to Sean Connery's audio, but only in certain shots. So when they have that shot of Sean Connery sitting in the corner and him on the bed or near the bed, that's when his audio is off. But when they cut it to just the professor, his audio sounds okay.
I didn't notice that, but it is something in general with the film. One of my notes was about not so much the audio quality itself, but just being there a lot of dubbing. And it was something that was quite prevalent with these early Bond films, is where they might get an actor that doesn't have a particularly good English accent, and they're worried about the clarity for viewers, or there's tons of reasons potentially. But I did notice in this film there is a lot of dubbing, and it's not always the best.
Yeah, I didn't notice too much about the dubbing, but like you say, the audio, you can definitely see that there's kind of issues there. But that one in particular stood out to me. I couldn't say anywhere else where that audio felt off, but that one seemed like in particular it was off. And I don't quite get why. It didn't ruin the scene or anything like that, but it was still something that stood out. Again, another one of these like technical problems that this film does have.
Yeah, and I suppose it's also this scene with the cool line and as you say, the very simple setup with the pillows, and Bond very minimal with what he's got, trying to beat the bad guy. It also does kind of it does show that Bond is a killer. He is a cold-blooded killer. Like there's probably one of the few times that Bond just does shoot someone so cleanly right there and then, for, I guess, really not knowing a lot about this person. I mean, he knows he's bad, but he's just, no, that's it, you're dead right there and then.
Well, that did stand out to me. The second shot is what really cements that. Because Bond shoots him and he goes down, but when he's on the floor, he shoots him again in the back.
Yeah.
Just to make sure he's dead.
Yeah.
So the next scene is actually them finally going to Crab Key Island. At this point, I kind of noticed about how much they love fade transitions. And I want to say every single transition in this film is a fade.
Really?
I mean, I might be wrong, but there's so many fades in this film that I'm pretty sure all of them, like between different scenes, I mean, of course, not different shots and things like that. I'm pretty sure every time they change scene, they do it using a fade.
I never picked up on that, but at least it wasn't any star wipes or something.
No, sadly not.
Sadly not.
But yeah, this is when it really came up to me. It's like, man, they really just love fading as a technique. And then as soon as I noticed it, every single time they did it, I was like, ha, yes, there it is again.
I know what you're onto. I know what you're up to.
Yeah, I'm
there.
onto you. So yeah, so they finally go to Crab Key Island, which I quite like the build-up they have to Crab Key Island. In the same way that they're building up Dr. No as this person, there's lots of kind of talk before this point in the film was like, Crab Key Island, don't go there. Almost to the point where it's a bit stereotypical, right? Because we've heard that cliche in so many films before about, oh, don't go to that place. It's got a dragon in it. It's quite spooky. No one comes back from there. But I feel like they actually did a nice job here. So it was nice to get to this point of the film and actually have them go to this island and see what it's all about.
Yeah. Although I will say, I think the actual scenes of them traveling to the island, it's very... They stood out to me for the wrong reasons, in that it's clear that it was not nighttime when they were shooting those shots, and they've put some sort of filter on it, like day for night shooting thing, which obviously you can do these days, and it's so easy to make day look like night. There's tons of different software and programs you can do. But it looked like back in 1961 or 62, all they could really do was just put this dark filter over the top, and it kind of made things weirdly contrasted in these scenes, and it did not look good. Didn't look good.
No, I did appreciate that you could see what was going on, though. like actually
Yeah.
see the characters and stuff.
Well, that's exactly it. They probably they couldn't have actually done that at night because the cameras were not good enough to pick up on any nighttime shooting. So it was what they had to do, but it's just making it nighttime was not the cleanest method.
So I have a question for you. Now you see in a couple shots of Quarrel, the fisherman guy, with a jug that he's drinking from.
Yes.
Is that water or is that booze?
I assumed it was water.
I mean, it makes sense on paper that it would be water, but the way they kind of focus on it and the fact that James Bond isn't drinking any water and no one else is, it made me think like, are they actually trying to go for a little bit of a comedy here where he keeps holding on to this big jug and drinking from it, and it's actually he's having a little bit of alcohol because he's scared about going to Crab Key Island?
Well, that would make sense actually, because as we said in the earlier parts of the film, he's made it clear that he is scared that there is a dragon, which is Bond thinks is some folk, something like that. But that is a good point. Maybe to calm his nerves.
That's what I took away from it, but more from like after the fact. During that scene, I wasn't sure. So if that is what they were going for, it was a little bit off. But if they weren't going for that, then it's a bit weird that they're focusing on this big jug and water, like because they just don't do that for any other character.
It was a ludicrously big jug.
He loved it, though. He loved his jug.
Not for much longer, unfortunately.
No.
Sorry, Quarrel.
R.I.P. Quarrel.
Yeah. I guess, they get to the island, they hide their boat away, and then it's like, right, let's go for a kip, because it's late and we should be up early. So, which I just thought was really funny. It's like, could they maybe not have, I don't know. But Bond just goes and like sleeps in this little ditch, presumably. And that's where, following on from this scene, we get probably one of the most memorable scenes from this film, I would say. It's always one you see in sort of montages of Bond films. You get the scene of Bond waking up and spotting Honey Rider on the beach. And it's a scene that in itself has been referenced in later Bond films as well. Jinx in Die Another Day and Daniel Craig even in Casino Royale, you could argue. Yes. So it's very iconic scene. And Honey Rider herself is, I don't know, I actually didn't, when I thought about the character before watching, I didn't really have any opinion on her. But I think watching it again, I actually quite like the character. I don't know about you.
I came away not liking the character.
Oh, okay.
She just felt a little bit too inconsistent for me. Like in that very initial scene, which first of all, I want to say Sean Connery starts to sing about mangoes and she cuts him off, which that's not great. I want to hear Sean Connery sing about mangoes.
Okay, maybe I think that's only you.
Yeah, probably. But they start off as her being very like tough and being like, I've got a knife, you get away from me, and being this kind of quite tough person. But then once they start talking, she speaks in a very weird way where it makes her sound really almost stupid to a sense. Like she speaks like a child in some ways, and her kind of pronunciation of things and the way she goes through her sentences really put me off kind of straight away. It gets better as the film goes on, but in that initial scene where she's talking about seashells, she sounds really weird. Like, this one's worth $50 in Miami. That's the one I wrote down, and I can't quite do her voice, but she just sounds dumb. And to me, she kind of jumps around between being somewhat tough, somewhat competent, somewhat having a backstory, and then being the completely dumb damsel who just happens to be there.
Yeah, I would agree in that I don't like how they eventually made the character just, like you say, damsel in distress, tied up, needing to be saved. But I did like the start where they did have this bit of a character where she's definitely got some baggage. Like she's sat down with Bond and talking about her history and losing her father and things. But I think part of maybe what you're saying, well, first of all, I don't really know how old that character is meant to be, because at one point she says that she never went to school and she instead read encyclopedias, and she started on A. Weird. She started on A when she was 8 and she's now up to T. So I was there thinking like, well, hang on, how old is she? How long does it take her to read a book? Because I would have assumed Like, is she quite young then still, or is she just a slow reader? I don't know. But also, I think an element of what you're saying with the weird kind of childlike voice sometimes, which I would agree, there is definitely some things that she says that just sounds off, is that she was dubbed, another character dubbed. And I don't know, I'm not going to blame this person that did the dubbing, but it could be that maybe having to match the way that Ursula Andress had it, filmed, maybe it made it difficult to put a different sort of style on it. So maybe they were just a bit stuck with this. That's all I can think of, maybe.
You're probably right, because again, it's not consistent, the way she kind of talks. It does jump about a bit. So if that's the case, that would totally make sense, because obviously some scenes you could just talk a certain way and talk properly. Other scenes you probably did have to draw your words out, which makes you sound more childish. So that would totally make sense to me if it's kind of a dubbing issue. But even then, it stood out, and it somewhat brought the character down, where you didn't get this consistent kind of tone and a way of speaking from her. And it seemed like it did change from scene to scene.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And she's called Honey Rider. Like, I was like, did I hear that right? Honey Rider?
Yeah, they right off the bat, they've got the Bond girl names down to a T, haven't they?
Yeah, I feel like even James Bond in the context of the film is like, Honey Rider, huh? Yeah? That's what you're going with?
Yeah, and he's like, oh, it's a beautiful name.
Because he had to. He had to say that.
Yeah.
So this takes us on to, we've got Fisherman, we got Bond, we got Honey, and then a boat shows up and is like very casual about everything. He's like, okay, folks, we know you're there. Come on out and we'll kill you. If not, we've got this gun, we're going to shoot at you. And it weirdly bothered me that his speaker didn't have a handle.
Don't get me started on that speaker. It's another one of these little things, little production things that it just makes it clear that it's a little bit rough around the edges, and it's really tiny. And I only spotted this because I'd read it before, so I'm sure it wouldn't really impact anyone watching the film otherwise. But at one point, he's speaking through the what are they called?
Loudspeakers.
Loudspeakers, yeah. He's speaking through a loudspeaker to him on the beach and saying all that stuff. And then he moves it away from his mouth, but it has the same sound of coming through a loudspeaker. Yeah,
it was so obvious it wasn't actually him amplifying his voice. That it was just a prop he was holding.
Yeah.
But like you say, it's a minor thing often, but
very minor.
Yeah, it even me not knowing that, it was noticeable.
Okay, well, there you go. But yeah, so this boat comes along, just starts shooting at them. And I assume it's the same people that then get off the boat and start like wading through the water and everything, chasing them.
Yeah, something I quite liked about that scene is that this was the first time you hear those classic gunshots in the Bond films. Because we've heard a lot of gunshots at this point, but they've all been silent, so they have this very muffled sound that didn't really feel very satisfying to me. But this is the first time where it's like, no, someone's firing a light machine gun. You get like, pew, pew, like all those really classic, iconic gun sounds that you associate with this film.
Yeah. Even if some of it was on sand, so I don't know if it would make that sound. But anyway, I'm not a gun expert.
No, it was probably wrong. But again, it was nice to hear. Cool. Yeah, after all this time, it was nice to hear those sounds.
Yeah.
So the next bit is very odd because we get more dragon talk, and this scene kind of revealed to me why I don't really like this bit, and it makes everyone but James Bond sound like a complete idiot. And I was saying before about Honey being very childlike, but also Quarrel joins in on it, and they both just sound so stupid because there's not a dragon. And what they're saying doesn't make any sense. And James Bond's not buying it and is saying, dragons don't exist. But they're both like, no, James, there's definitely a dragon. And then Honey starts saying about, I've seen a praying mantis eat her husband after making love. And it's just like, what are you talking about? Like,
yeah,
it's just such nonsense.
I don't quite understand where she was going with that. Was she just saying that there are scary animals out there?
I think she was just saying, I've seen a lot of strange things, so seeing a dragon is not strange to me.
Right. Okay. And yeah, I kind of just gloss over this whole dragon bit. I really do, because it is silly. You're right. I mean, the dragon Surprise, surprise! It's not a real dragon, folks. There's not a dragon in Jamaica just roaming around to this day. It's just a tank-looking thing that has a flamethrower attached.
Yeah, and it just doesn't. I don't mind that scene in itself with it. It's just the fact that they double down on it. I don't mind the idea of a dragon as like an urban myth that this fisherman guy has heard, and he knows a lot of people have disappeared, so he kind of buys into it to a certain point. But once they're actually there on the island, the fact that they keep hammering it home, it's like you're just making these characters just seem so stupid that I can't kind of buy into this at all.
I guess by that point, yeah, why do they even need to keep on with this? Because they're on the island. The whole point was to have that resistance of, everyone's scared of the island. But they're there now, so let's get on with it.
And I'm going to jump ahead a little bit because there's another scene a little bit later where they talk about this again. And she's like, look, dragon tracks. And it's just like, oh, oh no, stop.
Yeah, there's no saving that, even with good dubbing.
No, like you can get the best actress in the world to dub that line. And no, the line, these are dragon tracks, does not work.
No.
So following that, there's something I quite like about this film is that they're on an island and it seems quite like they just need to get across the island. It's not a big action sequence or anything like that. It's just they're being hunted on this island and it's quite dangerous. And it's more just them trying to get through it alive. Not that it really kind of goes anywhere, but when they were kind of going through the jungle and they had to hide from the dogs in the river, I was actually like, yeah, I'm quite into this. This more basic kind of approach of we're being hunted, so we have to just hide for a bit.
Yeah, kind of matches with a lot of the rest of the film. They just don't have much to use. There's no cue gadgets here, just a stick of bamboo or reed or whatever that is. And like I was saying earlier, this is kind of where they have that little scene between Bond and Honey Rider, and she does give that story about her father and going missing at Dr. No's facility. And then also something that I was a bit caught off by is the whole story about her being raped effectively. And I really was not expecting that in this first film, in such a manner as that. And it's kind of like, yeah, I almost feel like Bond is a bit too flippant with this, because he's just sort of, he's obviously there to do a job, right? He's there to stop Dr. No. But he's befriended this woman, and she's kind of telling him this stuff, and he's just sort of like, well, make sure it doesn't happen again, and all this sort of thing. It's like, oh, I thought there was a bit more potential there to have a nicer moment between the two of them, but it didn't really go very far.
Yeah, I think they were just trying to set up why Bond would rescue her and why they would have some sort of, I won't say relationship, but obviously it ends with them kind of kissing and stuff like that. So this was the scene that could have tied that together quite nicely, and is probably what they were going for, but it didn't quite work. The main thing I got out of that scene is that she loves seashells. Like she lives for those things. She cannot get enough. That was the main thing I took away from it.
Seashells are great, Tom. You can get $50 in Miami.
$50 in Miami. That's a good point. That's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money even today. Think of how much it was back then.
Yeah, so all the kind of details and ideas, I guess, are there for Honey Rider for it to kind of work. And I would guess a lot of that comes from the book to a certain extent. But the fact that the way it kind of gets executed in this film is why, for me, I would kind of be like, yeah, it's like, as the first Bond girl, it's fine, but not really too great overall.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I think for me, it was just, as I say, I didn't have any memory of her character at all, really. So having those little glimpses into a bit more of her backstory, and I mean, is she completely useless? Does she do anything of note to help? I can't actually think now. I want to say
no.
Yeah, I guess not. Oh well, can't win them all.
No. So before we move to the dragon scene, I do want to say, when they were doing the dog scene with the dogs barking and chasing them down, those dogs look like the friendliest dogs in the world. Like, they were clearly not aggressive. They were clearly just dubbing over the barks to make them sound aggressive. But they looked like really nice, friendly dogs. I was like, I'm not a dog person, but I'll give them a pat on the head. They seem like good boys.
Oh, I didn't even notice the dogs, really. I wish I did, though.
They were, I can't remember what breed they are, but I had a friend who had a dog similar to that who was just like the friendliest dog in the world. And when I saw those, I was like, yep, they look quite friendly. And I didn't see any of them actually barking, just kind of walking with their owners, trying to catch a monkey or something. I don't whatever was happening in that scene.
Oh, I just stick some barking over it. It'll be fine.
Yeah, put some barking, put some monkey sounds. Let's get to the next scene.
Yeah.
So after all of this, we finally get to the dragon, which I don't know if they double down on that. I don't think they do. I think you get the explanation of James Bond saying, well, look, that's clearly not a dragon. But I don't think they ever say, yes, I agree.
I just think I think you're right. I don't really think there is anything like that. I think they're obviously still scared of it because it's a big thing that's shooting at them with flames. But I really just don't. By this point, what did that add? Apart from, well, I suppose it killed Quarrel, but I mean, they could have just been caught. Really, I just think it was a bit. Was it meant to look cool? Was it meant to be a cool scene in itself? Because I didn't really think it was.
No, I think the scene itself is quite weak overall. Because all that scene really needs to do, as you say, they need to be captured and Quarrel needs to die. And it feels like there could have been a better way of doing it. But the dragon itself is just breathing fire randomly, which just looks a bit odd. And then Bond's big plan is, well, let's just shoot it. And then they shoot it. And then it just comes up slowly next to Quarrel and burns him alive. It's like, oh, well, that didn't work.
That's the thing. It's like it's so slow and it's so far away to begin with. So yeah, they're there trying to shoot the headlights out and this tiny little slit where the people are looking through. And then it just suddenly like, oh, wait, it's suddenly there. And oh, Quarrel is burned and dead. Well, seemingly dead because you don't really, like, you barely even see it. And then they're caught and it moves on.
Yeah, they clearly didn't have the budget for that, so they more just set fire to a bush, and then just had Honey go like, "Oh no!"
Yeah,
Quarrel.
Yeah, I think as we said, we like Quarrel. I thought Quarrel was quite a nice character, and I think it would have been had a bit more weight if he was, I don't know, just captured and shot or something like that, or just shot to begin with. I just think
something like that. So maybe trying to help out. You know, there's a number of ways where you know the function of this scene, and it would have been nice if they did a better job at hitting that function.
Yes, definitely.
But because of this scene, they do get captured, which you do get. I guess we were talking about, does Honey help? She does slap the guard a little bit.
Yes.
So there you go.
Yeah. Which maybe delays their capture by about 3 seconds.
Yeah, exactly.
So you go, girl.
So now they're captured, but again, we don't go straight into the Dr. No scene, which I think is a very smart choice. You know, everyone kind of remembers them sitting down and talking and things like that. But we actually still have like a couple of scenes before we even kind of get to that point, which I think ties into building up this character, but in different ways, where you know he's around, you know where you are, so you just kind of get this time of just absorbing the base and what's going on there and all the decor and all the weirdness. And I think that really helps build up that moment of Dr. No actually showing up.
It is a very strange setup, isn't it, with the whole hotel aspect to it. And everyone's so nice and friendly. Oh, this is so strange. And it definitely comes up later on as well as a sort of a bit of a cliche of like, oh, the villain's actually very nice and a lovely host, and look at these lovely rooms you get. But I don't know. I just think the whole bit. So yeah, they get caught. They go into the facility. They end up radiated, and having a nice scrub down to get rid of the radiation.
I love the bit where they get mopped. Like they spray them and then someone just like jabs them with a mop to try and help it. I was like, no, they're still radiated. I did the thing with the mop, so I don't know what to do.
I was thinking as I watched that, I would really like to have that done to me. I don't know why. I just think it seemed like someone was just a giant mop. I just want someone just to like I always want to be in a shower and someone just mopping me. Maybe that says something more about me. But I just thought that was such a strange, like them on the conveyor belt. It was a little bit silly, but then they're down to 0 or safe levels of radiation, and they're given these lovely plush bathrobes,
Oh, you
And
poor dears.
yes, come now, come and see your rooms. And then basically all they do is just drink some coffee and get drugged. And I don't really see why that was necessary.
No, I completely agree. And that is when it kind of clicked to me. It's like, yeah, there's a lot of kind of cliches in this film that you take for granted. And that's the one that really stood out for me as, well, this wasn't a cliche when they did this. So why did they do it? But it's like, obviously this is the first film to do it, so it became a cliche. But I guess part of the reason it probably did become a cliche is because it was very weird in the first place that it even happened.
Yeah, it was weird. It really was weird because nothing, I don't really know what that tells us as an audience. What does that do? I mean, I guess, well, actually, having said that now, I have just thought of an element of it, is that eventually when Bond does speak to Dr. No, there is this aspect of trying to sign him up to Spectre. So maybe it's to kind of show like, look, this is what you can get. Like, you know, we have a lot of money sort of thing. But then also, we're going to drug your coffee. So...
I mean, yeah, it could have worked in the sense of making Bond drowsy to make him weaker during their conversation. But as far as I can tell, that's not an element at all. Like by the time they wake up, he's totally fine. And he just has a chat anyway.
Yeah. So it was nice to see all the funky sets, and I did like the hotel rooms. I liked how they looked. I think it was kind of cool. Like you say, it's all that stuff's come back into fashion. I'm just there thinking, I'd kill for some of this furniture. But yeah, then they just very quickly moved on to dinner with Dr. No.
I kind of in general love the look of this place, and I think you were talking about the lack of money for the sets, and I think they did an amazing job of making this feel like an underground base, even though obviously they didn't have the money, and obviously these were all sets. So I really appreciate they almost made it an advantage and making it feeling more surreal, having these like really nice hotel rooms and stuff. It combined with the plants and the rocks and things like that, it almost gives it like an otherworldly feel, but it feels intentional, even though it was probably because they didn't have the money to properly go all out and make it a proper underground base.
Yeah, sort of a happy accident in a way.
But before the actual scene, we get the dinner scene, we get a short scene of Dr. No walking into Bond's bedroom and just standing over him for a bit.
Right. Yes, we do. What was that about?
I'm not too sure. I quite like the idea of showing part of his white iconic suit and his black gloves early, but I don't quite know if you needed that scene to do that. The only thing I can think of is about the sense of control that Dr. No feels he has over the situation and over Bond. That's the only thing I can think of. But I don't know if it needed to play out like that.
I had actually totally forgot about that scene until you mentioned it. So there you go.
Yeah, because that's your first look at the guy. You don't see his face, but that's the first time you see him. But it's so quick that you just see his legs. He walks in, he gets his old black gloves out or black hands out, and then there you go. That's it.
That is something... So yeah, Dr. No as a character, he has metal hands, right? Because they were affected by radiation or something like that. Are they meant, when you see his hands, are they meant to be metal, or are his hands covered, like you say, with gloves?
I take it they're covered with gloves, but they're metal underneath.
Right. Okay. It's not a major point. I just, whenever I see his hands on screen, I'm just thinking, are they meant to be like robot hands, or is it just shiny because he's wearing gloves?
I think the gloves ties into the budget. Yeah. They wanted it to be metal hands, and it was easier to just have him have black gloves and say, yeah, those are metal hands. So I think to try and tie that in, it's, yes, they are gloves, but they're gloves over the top of metal hands is always how I saw it.
Gotcha. Okay.
So then we go into the dinner scene, and something that stood out to me is the music kicking in when you first see Dr. No. It's not a very big piece or anything like that, but that music cutting in is really effective because of just how quiet the film has been for a good long time up to that point.
I don't actually remember the music, but that would make sense of having more of an impact because of that, because there are a lot of quiet scenes.
Yeah, I'm sure there was music when Quarrel died, but I think after that point, it's very quiet in terms of them being captured and going through this process. And then you hear the Dr. No music, which I believe is the first time and only time you hear that music. So it's, I'm assuming it was a theme for Dr. No. But it really is quite striking, and it really helps set that scene of, yes, this is Dr. No, this is important, this is a big moment. It almost feels like they put more into that moment than they did a more iconic moment of Honey Rider walking out of the ocean. I felt that way more than the scene of Honey Rider coming out.
So that's just because you don't like the song, Tom. Come on, be honest.
Well,
you don't like Mango Trees.
I like Sean Connery's version. I just didn't get to hear it.
That's why you hate that scene so much.
Exactly.
One thing about the bit as he goes up to sit with Dr. No, did you wonder about why they had that sort of double take at the painting?
No, what do you mean?
Because I did, and I was like, right, I'm going to look this up afterwards because I wonder what is going on there. So as he walks up some steps with Honey Rider up to the dinner table, there's this, it kind of sticks, the camera fixates on this painting right next to the stairs, and Bond goes up, sort of stops, and then does a double take looking at it, and then carries on again. And I was thinking, what's the deal with that? And it turns out, just a little bit of a tidbit of information, it was a painting of someone, can't remember now, by Goya, the artist, and it was actually stolen at the time of this film coming out. In real life, it was a stolen painting.
Oh.
So the idea is that, you know, Dr. No is so rich and powerful and evil that he has all this stolen paintings.
Oh, that's really cool. So people at the time would have recognized that painting.
Potentially, yeah, because I imagine it would have been in the news.
That's really neat. I completely missed that, to be honest, but that's a really neat detail.
Yeah, I like that.
So then we get onto the dinner scene and them talking, and their chemistry is great. It's so great to have James Bond being more, well, he calls him out, I think, for trying to antagonize him and trying to rile him up and get a reaction, and to just have Dr. No just sit there and be very to the point and very soft-spoken and just very clear in what he's trying to say. I feel like their chemistry right out the gate is great, and is kind of what it helps this scene be the iconic scene that it eventually became.
Yeah, I think the character Dr. No and the actor that plays him, which I think his name was Joseph Wiseman, it's a really good character. Like it's very, as you say, it's very quiet. It's very kind of methodical. He's just saying what he needs to. He's not being teased by Bond. He's not letting him get to him in that sense. And it kind of gives this impression of like someone who's obviously very cold and very intelligent and very evil, and it does the job very well.
Yeah, I like the balance they got with this character, where a lot of the stuff you might kind of agree with it, or I don't think it really poses any moral questions to you because you know he's evil. But they kind of, they add those little kind of things in there where he's like, oh, I tried to go to the west and go to the east, and none of them, I was completely rejected. So I kind of found Spectre instead and started working with them. But even though all that stuff has happened, you can still hate the guy. They don't try to make him sympathetic because he's so clearly arrogant. He's like, I'm a genius. Like, you can't fool me, Bond. I'm incredibly smart.
Yeah, and to be fair to him, he did spot some of the things that Bond was trying to do. Even in that little dinner table scene where he has the knife and he tries to hide the knife away and cause a bit of distraction. You know, he sees that. He's like, give me the knife. Listen, stop it, put it down. You got the knife. And I was just like, well, all right, fair play. You know, it's not going to be one of these villains that gets caught out by a really stupid mistake. Although you could argue later on it was a bit silly. But yeah, even at that dinner table scene, he is definitely a threat just because he calls out Bond and some of his tactics that he's using.
Yeah, like something that Bond would have done earlier in the film that definitely would have worked. He tries to do something around the similar vein. It doesn't work. So then you're like, okay, well, how is this going to play out? Yeah. And it definitely helps separate Dr. No from anyone else that we've seen in the film.
Yeah, definitely.
So I really like that Dr. No also calls Bond a stupid policeman. It's surprise. Oh, I think the full quote is a stupid policeman who luck has run out, which I think is a really nice throwback to the very first scene where we see Bond, where he's just winning that game. That's pure luck.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
I don't know if that's intentional, but there is that scene there. And we did talk about what is that game. And I think thinking about it going through this podcast, it might be to very intentionally set up that there is some luck on Bond's side, or in general, people view Bond as someone who's a little bit lucky and he kind of barely gets out of certain situations. Some of it is because, he's a cool spy who knows what he's doing, but also there is that element of luck, or at least how he's perceived by other characters. So when you have someone like Dr. No, he explains Bond getting to that point with luck and saying, you're very lucky. So he calls him a stupid policeman whose luck has run out, because he doesn't view Bond as so much a master spy who's even on the same level as intelligence as him. He just sees him as a stupid policeman who got lucky. That's why he was able to get as far as he did. And he was kind of hoping that Bond, with the way he offers a spot to Spectre, would be someone he would consider a genius. And then he establishes that not to be the case, insults him, and then has him beaten up a little bit more.
Softened up, yeah. That's true. Bond is inherently a very lucky character, because if he wasn't, then he would not be in as many interesting scenarios as he is. Like, you have to have a bit of Deus Ex Machina with his storylines. Otherwise, if everyone was making logical decisions and everything was either went well or didn't, it's like, well, yeah, then he probably wouldn't have ended up there or here or whatever. Like, sometimes he does need a bit of luck on his side. I like that kind of thematic bookending you've come up with there. That's kind of nice. I've not thought about that.
Yeah, whether that was super intentional, but that's how I took that initial scene. And when Dr. No said your luck has run out, I'm like, actually, maybe there's a little bit more in there. And I think it's something that gets hammered home a bit more in future films when you see it. But like you say, it's very clever that they do things like that or drop those hints, because these films need to have that tension and needs to have these odds and need to be things to be very close, so you like on the edge of your seat. And actually having that somewhat built into the character is probably part of the reason why James Bond has gone on for so long and has been as successful as he has been.
Yes, for sure.
So at the very end of the scene, Bond is softened up by Dr. No's henchman, and we get a very fake karate chop. I don't know why they're trying, like a lot of these films try to make us think that a karate chop is a really effective move that would hurt a lot. But it looks so fake and silly when the first thing he does is karate chop him on the side, and Sean Connery's like, oh! It's like, no, actually, no, that probably wouldn't happen.
No, but Tom, it's if you get it in the exact right space on, between the spine and then it works. Trust me.
Better than a punch.
Let's move on.
Okay. So after that, he wakes up in a metal cell and he tries to go through a grate and gets flung across the room, which I always liked.
It's a very, that packed a punch, that grate, for sure.
Yeah, you felt it. You didn't want to touch that grate again. He went flying and hit against the wall.
I do have problems with this scene, though.
Okay.
And actually, my problems with it were sort of... I was given an answer when I did a bit more research into this film and the production of it. So I was annoyed because it's like, well, why on earth would a prison cell have such a giant obvious grate to escape from? Right? That's what I was thinking when I was watching it. And then... what do you know? He goes for it, and it blows up, and I was like, okay, right. I see what they were doing. I spoke too soon. But then it did that once, and he still kicked it in and used it as an escape. So I was like, well, hang on, maybe I was right in the first place. That's just stupid. And it turns out that, again, this is one of those things where it's slight differences from the film and the book. In the book, Dr. No sets that up as a bit of a trial for Bond to test him to see if he's worthy of joining him. And that's why you have the water flowing and the hot pipe, Joe has to use his shirt to touch the pipe because it's too hot. And that's all set up because it was meant to be a challenge for Bond to pass as a test. But they didn't really, that element of it, they kept the things inside the pipe, but they didn't keep that idea of it being a test. So it was just kind of strange to me. It's like, yep, there's this really obvious escape route. And it turns out, yeah, that actually was just an escape. Like, it's just stupid.
Yeah, you don't get that sense at all in the film. That's really interesting about the book, framing it that way, because that does make a lot more sense. Yeah. I guess for the sense of the film, and again, they seem to very much care about the pacing, although that might be more for budget reasons. They probably just didn't really have a good way of setting up the whole tying in, this was a test, and having Dr. No be a test. They clearly just wanted to get to that scene of the missile going off, Bond sabotaging it, they have the fight and kind of move on.
Yeah.
But I kind of like the scene. I do kind of agree with what you're saying, that it's all a little bit too obvious. But I like the water bit because whenever you see a character going through a pipe in a film and you see water coming down, you expect them to start like rushing and it being like a bit of a chase scene. I really like it almost like subverted my expectations where Sean Connery or James Bond just held on and just like powered through it and then kept going. I was like, oh, yeah, I guess you could just do that and not get washed away. That makes way more sense.
So next time you're stuck in a pipe, Tom, you know what to do.
I know. I've got the information out.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of like that. And for me, this whole situation ties into what we've said before about the more grounded, simplified solutions to problems. So if in my head, the rubber shoe on the grate and holding onto the pipe and the hot pipe, for me, I was generally okay with that. Even though I agree with what you're saying, to me, it just tied into more Bond having very simplified solutions to these problems that he has to get himself out of.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what actually happens in that scene is good. I just think it's very strange having it from the get-go as being a very big grate in his cell. Surely someone looked at it and thought, can we not have the vent somewhere else outside the cell, maybe? It's fine. It'll be fine. We'll stick one little bomb in there and that'll do the job.
Yeah, that'll sort him out.
Yeah.
So this next scene, this whole kind of sequence, I have to admit, I can't watch it and not think of Austin Powers. So
it is the costumes, isn't it, as well?
Yeah, in brief, Bond escapes. He attacks somebody in a radioactive suit. He puts on that suit so it kind of covers his face and stuff, and then starts walking around, and there's a whole missile countdown sequence of Dr. No. But this is something that Austin Powers so heavily referenced. I think of Austin Powers more than this actual original scene at this point.
Oh, you just reminded me that I was laughing quite a lot at the man up the ladder who was where the big danger sign is that Bond effectively like. But he's wearing this like puffy one piece thing. It's just hilarious. I loved it. It really made me laugh.
Yeah, this whole scene, I did like it, but it's one thing I did like about it, to be fair, is how the missile countdown process was quite slow. It was actually felt a lot more like they were preparing for a missile launch. It wasn't just kind of rushed into. It felt like, no, this is actually a team of people trying to prepare for it. Although you get that silly moment of Bond standing right next to Dr. No, and they're like, Chang, what are you doing? Get out of here. Go back to your post. And he just wanders off sadly.
Yeah, and that's what I mean earlier about how they had this setup of Dr. No being incredibly intelligent and working out Bond's tricks. But then you equally have Bond 2 feet away from him. His face, let's be honest, would be still fairly visible.
Yeah, you could still see them.
And Dr. No just being like, yeah, come on, get back to work.
Damn it, Chang. What are we doing?
It's always Chang.
But you could have it, that's the thing, you could set it up so he didn't go anywhere near Dr. No, right? Because there wasn't actually any real reason for him to do that. I guess they probably wanted to make Dr. No look a little bit stupid on purpose, maybe, but it seems like there was a better way they could perhaps have that play out.
I think so. Maybe Bond just wanted to take a look at the station that Dr. No was looking at. You could argue that maybe, but equally, there is a nice big helpful sign that says danger, do not go over this number. So maybe just follow that.
That was so good. Like it's like a Simpsons joke, right?
It
like
really
super
is.
Fun, happy slide. Like it's so cliched and silly that it's just this is less subtle than the jokes that parody this.
Yes, absolutely.
Because what happens is that Bond in disguise to shut down the missile launch, he goes up to this lever, and I don't quite know what it does still. And there's a no load of numbers, and there's a massive sign above it saying danger level that points down to the numbers. So Bond just kind of spins it, makes it go above those numbers, and then that eventually blows up the entire base.
Yeah, bad design.
But the visual storytelling there is that there's this massive obvious sign so you understand what's happening. And it just it's so silly. And the fact that this is ultimately how this all pans out and how the base blows up, it's like, I'll forgive it because it's the first film in the series, but if this was a later film, I'd be like, that's so dumb. Like, no, what are you doing? You can't do that.
It is dumb. It is dumb. And I think, so yeah, Bond's there, he turns the valve, takes it over the danger number, the green glowy thing, radioactive thing starts bubbling and overheating, and everyone's going crazy. Dr. No notices. and that's when you get Bond versus the villain, the fight. And the thing I wrote down for this, as I was making notes, is I just think it was a really kind of lame end to the character. The only thing of note that you could really say for me is that he was sort of hoisted by his own petard of having his hands not being able to grab onto the pipe. But I think for what I thought was a really surprisingly imposing villain for how little he was on screen for, such a lame ending to the character.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I really like that moment of seeing the hands going for the pipe and it not working. But I was also very surprised to see that it resulted in a fist fight.
Yeah.
That they just... Dr. No says, oh, that's James Bond. So it just runs up to him and gives him a punch. And
yeah,
they start having a fight. It's like,
he's
what?
got so many henchmen. I guess they're all running around. But he's like, no,
they all
I'm
just
going to do
leave.
this myself.
Yeah. So they did set this up somewhat by showing his hands crushing, I think, a statue in the dinner scene.
Yeah.
But the whole point in the character is that he's not physically imposing, but he still has an imposing presence due to his demeanor and what he says, which is great. So, like you say, it's kind of not really a good payoff for his character to have him just simply get into a fight and lose that fight.
Yep. And then he's in the bubbly hot water and presumably just melts and dies. And I think it happened so quickly. I think that fight was probably about a minute of screen time, maybe not even that. It was just gone. It was gone before I even knew it, and then back onto the rest of the thing exploding, really.
I think the biggest disappointment with that fight is that they don't bring back the character of Dr. No. And I feel like with what they set up in this film, I'm not saying he should replace Blofeld or anything like that, but I would have actually really massively appreciated if Dr. No came back in some form. That they kind of gave him a little bit of a lame end because they knew it was a great character with great chemistry with Bond, so they would bring him back in the future. But no, this is the only time you see him. They spend a ton of time setting up this character. He just has a bit of fist fight and then melt, and then that's that. But I would have loved if they actually ended up bringing back Dr. No for Thunderball or something like that.
I think you're onto something here, because let's actually go through this. He falls into the radioactive water, radioactive. Maybe he comes back as a big green monster. The Incredible No.
I did not think you were going there with that.
Oh.
I thought you were going to say radioactive, loses all his hair, he is Blofeld.
No, The Incredible No.
But no, Incredible No, yeah. Sure.
Obviously. I think, on a more serious note, I think that is why a lot of people were quite excited at the thought of Rami Malek. Lots of people thought he was going to be a new interpretation of Dr. No in No Time to Die, which obviously didn't end up panning out. But that would have been really cool, just to have that character back.
Yeah, and I think from what I remember of Goldfinger, I think he works quite well in his own standalone film, but I do honestly think there was enough there with Dr. No that he could have shown up in other films. And I guess maybe having him show up in From Russia with Love may be a little bit lame, but it's just a great character. I think he deserved another chance.
Yeah, I'd agree.
So then we go into the base going into Meltdown, which is again something else that Austin Powers parodies, because everyone is just running around with no real sense of direction. It's just pure everyone just running. It's not like everyone's going in the same place or anything like that. It's just like headless chickens to the point where Bond just trips somebody up to interrogate them.
Well, what got me was that, so he goes in and he's just grabbing some people. Where's the girl? Where's Honey Rider? And he eventually finds her. But at one point when they are escaping, and there is just everyone running around, as you say, like headless chickens, there are people running away from boats. And I'm like, there's a boat, and there's like a really empty boat that Bond goes straight to. And you've seen people run in the opposite direction. I'm just thinking, where are they going then?
Yeah, I don't know what the direction was for that scene, but everyone was there was no sense of direction. There was no sense of, okay, these are the protocols and we're following in those protocols. It was just pick a direction and run. I'm sure the Titanic was less frantic than what happened in this scene.
I think you might be right. Also, one thing I just want to mention as well. So he goes and unshackles Honey Rider, who had been put in this sort of bit of water that was slowly rising, to eventually drown, which kind of seems a bit slow, really. If you're going to kill her, just kill her. But I was reading about this. I really liked reading differences between the book and the film. And in the book, similar sort of thing where she's tied up, but she was going to be killed by crabs. Crab key, right? There's just evil crabs, I guess, that would eventually pinch her and eat her. Or maybe they're really deadly ones in Jamaica, I don't know. And they actually did try to do this for the film. But where they had these crabs, and I think they might have been, I think I read that they were frozen, and they just weren't cooperating, as in like moving. So you just had these bunch of dead-looking crabs. So they're like, actually, let's just have some water. Let's just use water.
Yeah, that's a good point, because they never tie, or you never see any crabs as far as I remember. So it's called Crab Key, but it's just a name for this film. It doesn't tie into anything else that happens.
Yeah.
But this is the first example of a unnecessary Bond villain trap, which was quite nice to see. It was very basic, but it was so completely unnecessary that I was like, oh, it's nice to see the first one of these. Just tie him down and let the tide kill him.
Yeah. I mean, it was so quickly. It was not even any trouble. He just went in there and just unshackled. Like, it wasn't even an effort. He just went in and that was it.
Yeah, and she seems very calm about it. It stood out to me how she wasn't like, help, I'm dying. Oh, James, thank God you're here to save me. She was just like, oh, hi, James. Like the room.
She'd accepted her fate.
Yeah. She was like, well, I was going to be drowned, but I guess I'll come with you. That works too.
Yeah.
So now we've pretty much arrived at the end of the film where Bond steals a boat from two people and Bond and Honey goes away. We get a really nice big explosion. I'm assuming most of the budget went on this because everything blows up and it's very much focused on as its own separate thing. Bond escapes and then you just get this scene of everything blowing up. And for the 60s, pretty good explosion.
I would agree. Yeah, good explosions there. Yeah, I think you're right. I think they actually had to ask for more money to do this final big send-off, budget-wise. But it was good that they did, because as you say, I think without it, it would have been a bit of a damp squib at the end. Sometimes you just need some fireworks, you know?
Yeah, like it's satisfying to see everything kind of blow up on a very basic level. And it's something that the Bond franchise became kind of known for, just blowing everything up. Bond shows up to somewhere and it blows up eventually. Yeah.
So sometimes it is just you're there with your popcorn and you want to see explosions.
Yes. Explosions are cool. Okay, so the last few moments of the film, we have the US guys who they did set up, which is quite nice. I had actually forgotten that Bond said, go and get some Marines and meet us at Crab Key Island. So that was actually quite a nice little payoff to see them show up, because like, oh yeah, they did set that up. The music choice was very weird. Didn't like the music here.
When did Bond say about the Marines?
No, when they split up.
Oh.
So when they're in the boat, the nighttime scene where you were like, well, this clearly isn't night. He told him, we're going to shore. And then he tells the CIA agent, you go and get some Marines and meet us back here.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I must have been so angry about the daytime, nighttime stuff. I completely missed that. But okay, because I did
furiously writing notes.
I did wonder how they knew that they were there. I mean, obviously that they knew they were going to be in Crab Key, but like very quickly they were on it. So okay, that's good to know.
Yeah, so they did set that up, which is nice. But you got these weird trumpets that I didn't like. I think they were supposed to be like, oh, US military trumpets, but it felt as like the final kind of song and final kind of victory moments to have all these just like US Army trumpets. I was like, oh, this sounds a bit weird.
Well, you got to please the Americans somehow.
Yeah.
Can't have it too British now.
No, not James Bond.
Not James Bond. No.
That'd be crazy.
Still got to get that overseas income.
Then we have the final moments of the film where Honey and James Bond decides to make out, I guess.
Yeah, you know what? We don't need to be towed. Just let that go. We'll just have a little canoodle here in the boat whilst there's probably a lot of radioactive stuff in the air. Just
flaming wreckage.
Yeah.
No water.
They got their priorities. Yeah, and that's kind of it. I know I was curious, and now I forgot. Did it have a James Bond will return?
I didn't see it.
I didn't see one either, but
because the credits were very short.
Yeah.
And I was waiting for that to come up or something like that, but no, the credits were very short. It was just the actors and then they played a bit of the Bond theme, not even all of it. And then I was watching on Blu-ray, so then it went to the copyright notices.
I guess maybe at that point, being the first one, they just didn't know how it was going to do. So it'd be a bit ballsy of them to put that it was going to be a sequel without even knowing.
Or smart, depending how you look at it.
Yeah, true. Well, the audiences are expecting it. Come on, cough up.
Or maybe they just didn't have a plan. Like, they might not have known that From Russia with Love was the next one. I'm guessing that. But maybe.
Yeah, that too.
So that was Dr. No. All of it. I feel like we were quite thorough.
Yes, for sure. And I got to say, as a little bit of a wrap-up, kind of alluded to this at the beginning, but I think putting it as my third worst Bond film was shameful watching it back. It was nowhere near as bad as I thought it would be, and actually had a lot more that worked that didn't for me in the end. What I did put at the end, note-wise, is that, it's rough around the edges, but I think it was surprisingly good. And I think part of that, and we haven't really mentioned a lot about Sean Connery himself being Bond, just like Bond the character, but Sean Connery himself, I think if it wasn't for him, I mean, he is just such a charming character on screen. You can't help but like him. He's so cool, and I think with anyone else, it potentially might not have been anywhere near as successful. So I remember in our first episode I said that I don't really think I'm a Sean Connery guy, and I'm probably still more a Roger Moore man. But I have to give it to Sean Connery. With the first film, there's a lot at stake here, and I think he is pretty much the core reason why I enjoyed it so much.
I would agree. I think it's the way they set up Bond and how Sean Connery initially plays the character and makes it really work with all the different elements. Like, it is very surprising how many of those elements are with the character. Of course, it's not fully fleshed out, and we'll get more as we go. But all those little elements and how it works really well. And then the fact that we have the villain, Dr. No, who's actually a really strong villain. So that, like you say, there's a lot of stuff that works and a lot more than you would kind of expect. But for me, a lot of the stuff that doesn't work, I can enjoy on that campy level, like the car chase scene just not being set at all, and the car going off the cliff and things like that. So even the stuff that is off, and you could say, well, that wasn't shot very well, I still feel like they're very enjoyable with this film and doesn't really kind of bring down the other elements that do work. So overall, it actually ends up being like quite a good time by the time you get to the end. I
enjoyed it. I really did enjoy it. And we've mentioned about the pace. It didn't outstay its welcome. It all moved by very, very quickly, I think. And I did also kind of wonder, because it is a very sort of simple, it's very pure in the sense of, there are no gadgets. Bond is using hair, he's using dust, he's using pillows as his way to get through this plot. And I kind of wondered in my head, like, how different would this film have been if it came just 2 films later, maybe? And would I actually like it as much? I don't know, because I think a large part of it is I do like the purity of it.
I would agree. Yeah, the purity is what makes it work. Like we've said, this is a very simple film when you get down to it. It is just, there's something going on in Jamaica. Bond goes there, figures out what's going on, goes to a location, finds the villain, shuts him down, blows up, and go. And no other film after this, or the films that have tried to make this formula work, is just, there's not that much to go with it. You have to change it up. You have to do something a little bit more complex. But the fact that this is just Bond going after Dr. No means that it works. It does what it wants to do, and it does it quite well, and it makes it kind of stand out as a very traditional Bond versus the villain. Now, we'll see other version of this, like the Man with the Golden Gun, but I feel like in my head, at least where we currently stand, Dr. No is the one that kind of does it the best due to what you say, the purity of the film. Yeah,
I guess that's what we'll see eventually when we get to those sort of films. I think since we are now at the end, and we the whole point of this podcast is to rank them, and I think with that in mind, I can firmly put this as number 1.
Wow, okay, that's a turnaround and a half.
I know, from 23rd to 1. Wow,
he must have loved this film.
I loved it. Well, I liked it. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think again we can't rank these. or we can't rank this film because it's the only one we've seen so far, so it just stays in the middle as the baseline as we go forward. And I think we'll see most likely these other Bond, Sean Connery early ones are probably going to eclipse it. But I think when all is said and done, Dr. No for me is going to be quite high. I would probably guess it will be a top 10 one for me, but we'll see. I don't know. I definitely see it being more in the upper half of the Bond franchise rather than the bottom half.
Yeah. I don't know where. It's too early to tell, but it's definitely not going to stay at 23rd. That's for sure.
Yeah. So any last thoughts before we end this off?
Any last thoughts? Not really. No, I kind of wish I hadn't said about that mop thing.
What?
About being scrubbed by a mop. Kind of wish I hadn't said that now, because people will think I've got some weird kink. But apart from that, I enjoyed it, and it was fun to revisit again for sure. Yeah,
this has definitely made me feel very good about revisiting these films. Although I wrote 9 pages of notes for this one, and this is not even 2 hours long, so I might have to come up with a new note system that doesn't give me hand strain.
You're going to end up with carpal tunnel by the end.
Yeah, yeah. I'm going to have Dr. No hands by the end.
Oh no, just don't try and grab onto any poles.
Yeah, I'll stay away from swimming pools and boiling hot water. Okay, so thank you very much for listening to the Bond Revisited podcast. Next time, I don't know if I want to do the phrase. I said it last time. I don't know if I want to do it.
Do it. You know you want to.
Okay. The Bond Revisited podcast will return in From Russia with Love.